Hey everyone, welcome to another exciting adventure. Today, Audio Novel presents Game of Thrones, Another Dragons, by Creations X. And if you're looking for more amazing stories, don't forget to check out my Patreon page. Your support helps turn incredible tales like this one into fully immersive audiobooks. Join me on this journey, and together, we can bring more stories to life. Thank you for being part of the adventure. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Once upon a time, there was a guy named Jay, just your average college student leading a pretty ordinary life. But one weekend, he decided to watch the last episode of the Game of Thrones series. Now, Jay had mixed feelings about the ending. He wasn't thrilled with it, no matter which way you looked at it. If Daenerys survived, well, she went on a crazy killing spree due to her extreme emotional issues. That wasn't exactly a happy ending. And if she was dead for good, why did Jon have to go into exile? Jay thought Jon could have made a great king with Bran's guidance, the guy they call the Broken. For Jay, there were just too many unnecessary deaths that messed with the emotions of fans, from the beginning to the very end. But, with a not-so-happy heart, Jay decided to call it a night. After all, he had to wake up early for class the next day. Little did he know that this would be his last night as a human. When he woke up, he had become something else entirely, a monster. As Jay was drifting off to sleep, something felt a little off. When he tried to roll over, it was like he was teetering on the edge of a fall. He opened his eyes and was met with a hazy, smoky atmosphere. All around him were ruins, and in the distance, he could see active volcanoes spewing fiery molten rock. Jay hoped desperately that this was all just a dream. But deep down, he had a sinking feeling that it wasn't. When he looked at his hands, they were no longer human hand, they resembled bat wings. Panic welled up inside him, and he let out a scream that seemed to shake the very core of his being. After he calmed down a bit, Jay realized that he had a massive tail curling around him. He tried to get up, but it was a struggle because of his odd body shape. The only word that escaped his lips was a frustrated, "Fuck." It came out as an earth-shattering roar that even startled him. As he took in his bizarre appearance, a thought crossed his mind. Could I be a dragon? Jay pondered. To test his theory, he tried to exhale a fiery breath, just like the dragons in Game of Thrones. But to his dismay, all he managed was a puff of air. It seemed he wasn't a full-fledged dragon, but something similar, maybe a wyvern. This wyvern had teeth, unlike the wyvern described in the show. Jay, now in his dragon-like form, struggled to move about. Being a creature of such size and scale was a challenge for him, especially since he was once human. As he approached a nearby structure, he realized that he was enormous. The door of the old ruins looked tiny, only even big enough for his eyes combined. Since it was just a decrepit building, Jay decided to break through to see what lay inside. To his astonishment, it turned out to be an armory, filled with an array of beautifully crafted swords scattered about. Jay's eyes wandered, taking in the sight, but then he noticed something on his back. There was a saddle perched there, and a thought struck him, so I'm meant to have a rider. But where is he? More questions swirled in Jay's mind. A dragon-like appearance, a saddle, ancient ruins, a gray haze, and a landscape surrounded by numerous volcanoes. It couldn't be, could it? Don't tell me this is the ruins of Valyria, Jay wondered aloud. Jay's growing certainty that he was a dragon if he is in ruins of Valyria. So Jay decided to make one more attempt to breathe fire. After several tries that resulted in nothing more than puffs of air, he didn't hold back. He gave it all he had, and something peculiar happened. As he exhaled, he felt an invisible force gathering around him, drawn into his breath. Suddenly, a colossal tunnel of black flames erupted from his mouth, obliterating everything in its path. Jay stood in stunned silence for a heartbeat, then bellowed in frustration, "Why am I in this freaking world?" His thunderous roar echoed through the ruins. Chapter 2. After taking some time to gather his thoughts, Jay decided to embrace his new identity and explore this world he had found himself in. Uncertainty hung in the air as he couldn't pinpoint the era he was in. But before leaving the ruins behind, he felt a curiosity pulling him to investigate further. Despite the irritating smoke that surrounded him, Jay strolled through the crumbling remains of Valyria. As he neared a massive, half-ruined tower that dwarfed even his dragon form, he couldn't resist the temptation to see what lay inside. However, when he tried to break through the inner layer, which seemed to be made of some metallic material, he realized his strength wasn't enough. So, Jay decided to unleash his fiery breath once more. The intense black flames melted away the metal, revealing a pool of molten gold pouring out from the structure's interior. Jay gazed upon the gold with a sense of longing, a reminder of the human life he had left behind. But amidst the molten gold, something caught his eye: dragon eggs. Using his bat-like wings and claws, he carefully extracted the eggs from the still liquid gold before it solidified. Before him lay 4 dragon eggs, each a different hue: white, red, gray, and blue. Jay regarded them with a mix of wonder and longing. As a lone dragon now, he felt an unspoken need for companionship. Memories from a TV series he'd watched flashed through his mind, reminding him of how dragon eggs were hatched. The challenge now was how to transport them. Jay's sharp gaze caught sight of a metallic box within the tower, gleaming with gold. With great care and using his colossal claw, he maneuvered the box out, the hole barely accommodating his massive appendage. It was a comical sight, a majestic dragon struggling with a small box. With considerable effort, Jay managed to place the eggs into the box, all the while wrestling to maintain his balance with his lower limbs. If anyone had witnessed this spectacle, they would have been hard-pressed to contain their laughter. Jay had successfully placed the dragon eggs into the box, but he still faced the challenge of carrying it. The box was too small to grip with his enormous mouth, and he worried that one wrong move might send it tumbling into his hungry stomach. Being a dragon, he was starting to realize, came with many limitations that were quite inconvenient. Suddenly, hunger pangs struck him, and he knew he had to leave Valyria as soon as possible to find food. With great effort, Jay managed to hold the box in his mouth. It was then that he remembered he hadn't yet tried to fly. He attempted to flap his wings, but all he achieved was losing his balance on the ground. Determined, Jay took a different approach. He started running as fast as he could and then suddenly flapped his wings with all his might. Slowly, he began to lift off the ground. It was an exhilarating feeling, and he wanted to scream with joy, but the box in his mouth held him back. After a few minutes, the fog around him began to clear, revealing an endless expanse of sea below him. It was his first flight in both lives, and it was a moment of pure wonder. As Jay continued his flight, he grew more adept and faster with each passing moment. The journey seemed to stretch on, but eventually, he spotted an island in the distance. Without hesitation, he soared towards it, eager to find his first prey. Upon reaching the island, he noticed several villages nestled within the dense forest, along with structures resembling temples. His keen eyes soon detected a few wild animals in the woods. Jay set his sights on a wild goat, even though it seemed quite small. The goat sensed the presence of a predator and dashed away in a frenzy. However, despite its efforts, it ended up in Jay's powerful claw. With a series of wing flaps, Jay managed to land near a hill. Unbeknownst to him, the Nathi people of the island had spotted him. They saw him as a colossal, flying monster and sounded alert throughout every village. Panic spread through every village as they faced not only the threat of slavers but now the arrival of a massive and menacing beast. Chapter 3. Jay was oblivious to the commotion he had caused among the island's people. His hunger consumed him entirely, and he needed to satisfy it. Setting the box down, he decided to prepare his meal. With a gentle breath of fire, he roasted the goat for a moment before gulping it down in one swift motion. Not a single bone was left behind, he devoured every bit of it. However, his hunger still gnawed at him, and he sought out another prey. The idea of fishing in the sea crossed his mind. So, he buried the box inside a pit he created with his claw and concealed it from view. Then, he took to the skies and flew out over the sea, on the lookout for his next meal. He soon detected the presence of a massive whale floating on the surface, basking in the sun. Jay wasted no time and used his enormous claw to snatch the whale from the sea. Carrying it back to where he had rested earlier, he applied a bit of heat to the whale and devoured it hungrily. An hour later, only bones remained, and Jay settled down near the hidden dragon eggs. As Jay lay near the dragon eggs, he suddenly sensed the approach of heartbeats. Turning his massive head, he saw a group of young people, each holding a long spear, cautiously drawing near with trembling hands. Jay hadn't realized he had settled on an island inhabited by the Nathi people. These young islanders had likely never encountered a creature like him before. Fear was evident in their eyes as they cautiously approached, their spears at the ready. Jay, not wanting to provoke them, remained lying down, attempting to show that he meant no harm. To the astonishment of all, one brave young man among them mustered the courage to approach Jay without using his spear. With a sense of wonder and excitement, he reached out his hand to touch the magnificent beast. His boldness inspired his friends, who joined him in approaching Jay. However, when Jay lifted his head slightly, it sent a shiver of fear through the onlookers, causing them to take a step back. The young man who had come closest nearly stumbled in his nervousness. Jay observed the young man for a moment before settling back down. This time, the young man refrained from attempting any daring feats and instead, he began to talk to Jay. Jay stared at him with open eyes, though he couldn't comprehend the words they were speaking. But then, something strange happened. Jay started to understand the young man's intentions, not through their language but through some other form of communication. It became clear that the young man had a kind and gentle nature and that he wished to soar through the sky like Jay did. As time passed, more youngsters gathered around Jay, though they didn't dare to touch him. Jay found it fascinating that these brave people approached him with such courage. He realized they were saying Noth, a word that grabbed his attention. It dawned on him that he had ended up on the island of Noth with the Nothi people, a realization that left him both surprised and intrigued. Days passed, and Jay found life in Noth to be rather pleasant, especially as a dragon. Unlike when he was a human, he didn't need to eat as frequently, but when hunger struck, he required large quantities of food to satisfy his appetite. As time went by, Jay became the center of attention for the people of Noth, from the young children to the elderly. The kids treated him like a living toy, joyfully playing around him, while the elders approached him with curiosity, trying to understand this colossal and enigmatic creature. Even though the Nothi people refrained from eating meat, they made special efforts to bring offerings of birds, goats, and other mysterious creatures to Jay as a tribute. They began to believe that Jay was sent by their deity, the Lord of Harmony, who they believed had created the entire universe and everything in it. They saw Jay as a guardian sent to protect them. Chapter 4. As the days rolled by, Jay found life in Noth rather comfortable, especially for someone who enjoyed taking it easy. He spent most of his time reclining, gazing out over the lush forest, occasionally indulging in snacks from the sea or the nearby woods. The once bustling gatherings of people had dwindled, leaving only the young and daring individuals, along with the playful children. Jay attempted to communicate with them, using the same mysterious ability that allowed him to understand their intentions, despite not knowing their language. After a while, he decided to try some stunts, harnessing an almost imperceptible energy that surrounded him. He envisioned creating a mere floating flame, but to his surprise, the energy conjured a massive fireball. This discovery led Jay to realize something intriguing. Valyrian dragons possessed a latent ability for magic, a fact not mentioned in any of the books. He reasoned that the dragon's intelligence was limited, which hindered their exploration of their own capabilities. Even with the thin presence of this magical energy, Jay could amplify it, thanks to his dragon nature. This revelation shed light on why Valyrians of old, before the fall of Valyria, used dragons as conduits for powerful pyromagic and other forms of intense sorcery. It was because such magic demanded an immense reserve of mana, which only a dragon could provide. Despite his best efforts, Jay couldn't manage to communicate directly with the people of Noth, even though he could understand their intentions. One day, out of curiosity and a desire to connect, Jay attempted to use the mana around him as a conduit to delve into the thoughts of an elderly man who had approached him. However, in his eagerness, Jay ended up using too much mana, ended up killing the old man. But, in a strange turn of events, Jay found himself inheriting the memories of the men he had unintentionally killed. Even in his passing, the old man harbored a lingering resentment for what Jay had inadvertently done to him. As Jay absorbed the man's memories, an unexpected emotion surged within him, envy. In his previous life, Jay has been single, but the old man had lived a long and indulgent life. He had relished in every pleasure the island could offer. The man had taken pleasure with abandon, regardless of age, in the village he left behind. In Nothi society, the concept of marriage and loyalty was foreign. People engaged in intimate affairs freely, as long as both parties were willing. As time passed, more Nothi gathered around the old man, eager to understand what had transpired. Jay, however, stayed laid out, making it clear he had nothing to do with the old man's passing. To the other Nothi, it was puzzling for an elder like him to depart so suddenly. Although there were no signs of injury or burns on the old man's body, they couldn't shake the feeling that Jay was somehow connected to the event. Eventually, they decided to give the old man a respectful burial, attributing his passing to the natural course of old age. Days continued to pass, and the young Nathi would visit Jay. One day, Jay decided to try something different. He used the mana around him to manipulate the air, creating vibrations that formed a kind of communication with a young man he deemed worth talking to. Jay addressed the young man with a simple, "young human." The young man was taken aback for a moment when he heard the sound. His response was an unending barrage of questions, fired at Jay without pause. Jay soon regretted initiating the conversation. He had become a new focal point of attention again among the Nathi people, who marveled at the fact that their guardian beast could speak. Although Jay initially regretted his decision to communicate, he soon realized its value. He might have the appearance of a dragon, but his inner self remained human, susceptible to boredom over time. The ability to talk and engage with the Nathi people helped alleviate that sense of monotony. One day, Jay sensed the approach of ships from a distance, but he didn't think much of it. However, after a couple of hours, the young man rushed to Jay in a state of panic. Jay looked at him, puzzled by the urgency in the man's voice. The young man implored, "My lord, please save our people from evil men. They've come to take away my sisters and brothers. Please, you must save us." Jay now realized the identity of the incoming ships. They were slavers. Chapter 5. Jay raised his colossal head to gaze out to sea from the mountaintop, surrounded by a shroud of fog. His eyes shifted back to the young man who remained kneeling before him. He understood that the slavers would not dare to enter during the daytime due to the threat of butterfly fever, a disease easily contracted by outsiders. The slavers were biding their time, waiting for nightfall to launch their raid from the sea into the deep forest. With a voice that resonated like thunder, Jay commanded, "Human, gather the strongest among you and bring them here." The young man, filled with a surge of adrenaline, hurried to assemble a group of formidable individuals. He watched Jay with a mix of awe and anticipation, knowing that this majestic creature was about to intervene to save them. Jay rose from his resting position, with a powerful shake of his massive body to remove the dust. He was a giant dragon, surpassing even the legendary Vhagar in size, and possessed the vitality of a young dragon. His form was imposing, radiating the essence of a young dragon. With a mighty roar that echoed through the land, birds scattered in all directions from the dense forest, terrorized by the sheer force of his bellow. Down below, the Nathi people, initially in a state of panic, turned their gaze towards the hill, dropping to their knees in worship. They sensed the immense power within Jay and interpreted his roar as a sign of divine anger. Out at sea, even the slavers aboard their ships felt a shiver of fear crawl up their spines at the distant roar, an eerie sound unfamiliar to their ears. The young man standing near Jay felt his legs tremble, weakened by the sheer force of the dragon's roar. He looked up at Jay with a reverence reserved for deities. The slavers, alarmed by the mighty sound and heeding a primal instinct for self-preservation, quickly ordered their ships to turn. They cared more for their lives than the little gold. The 7 galleys began to shift direction in an orderly retreat. Meanwhile, Jay took a deep breath, smoke billowing from his maw, and then sprinted towards the edge of the hill. With tremendous force, he launched himself into the sky, unleashing a colossal storm of fire and smoke that concealed his ascent. Emerging from the billowing flames, Jay soared above the ships, his presence announced by the mighty black fire breath he unleashed. The slavers, gripped by panic, recognized what they were facing. One of them spiraled into madness, chanting, "Dragons are back, dragons are back, dragons are back." Archers aboard the galleys gathered at the hull, launching a barrage of arrows at the approaching Jay. However, what confronted them was not the dragon himself, but Jay's black flames. Each fiery pillar crashed down upon the ships, causing devastating explosions. Those unfortunate enough to be thrown into the sea met a gruesome fate, as Jay's intense flames boiled the water around them. One by one, Jay sunk the galleys with his fiery pillars. With a mighty claw, he seized the last remaining ship and lifted it into the air. His colossal claw pierced the hull to hold, and some of the slavers leaped into the sea in an attempt to escape. But Jay rained his flames into the water, boiling them in the very sea they sought refuge in. Jay carried the last ship to the mountaintop. Jay gently set the captured ship down in his usual resting spot in the air, landing nearby. A gathering of strong Nathi individuals had assembled around him, their anticipation palpable. Jay spoke with an air of authority. Humans, the gods do not ask you to show kindness and mercy to your enemies. These intruders have come to steal your loved ones away. There is no need for hesitation. Seize them, prepare a funeral pyre, and bind them to it, for my sake. The Nathi were taken aback by Jay's words, as he embodied the presence of their deity. Then, a middle-aged man stepped forward, resolute in his determination to take down the captives hidden within the ship's hull. He had lost his parents to slavers when he was young, and his feelings of regret and hatred toward them had never waned. Others joined him, carrying out Jay's orders. The slavers drew their swords in defense as the Nathi people approached with spears, but Jay intervened. Using his mana, he heated their swords until they were too hot to handle, forcing the slavers to toss them aside. Many of the invaders began pleading for their lives, as they understood the Nathi language and knew what the speaking dragon had commanded. Despite their pleas, the Nathi captured all the slavers and began constructing a massive funeral pyre. They bound the captives to the structure, preparing for the solemn task ahead. In the midst of these preparations, Jay unearthed the box he had hidden when he first arrived on the island. Jay asked the young men who had been communicating with him daily to open the box and place the dragon eggs at the center of the funeral pyre. The young men regarded the eggs as mere ornate stones, unable to fathom their significance. Nevertheless, he obeyed Jay's request. Jay understood that the mana around him was insufficient for the eggs to hatch using conventional means. Normal flames wouldn't suffice, given the depleted mana. To overcome this, Jay decided to employ his own fiery breath, which could both provide the necessary mana and generate the heat required for hatching. After all, his breath was inherently composed of mana. Chapter 6. As Jay advanced, the Nathi people swiftly cleared a path, fearing his enormous form might inadvertently trample them. He issued a stern command: "Humans, leave this mountain immediately. It is no longer safe to remain here." The Nathi obediently descended the hill, though some of the younger individuals hesitated briefly. Their fear of incurring the wrath of Jay, whom they deemed the ruler of the sky, ultimately prompted them to join the others in leaving the hill. Once Jay had confirmed that no one remained on the hill except the captured slavers, he turned his attention to them. Some of the slavers begged for mercy, while others lay unconscious. Jay took a deep breath and unleashed an unending torrent of his fiery breath at maximum intensity. The captured slavers had no opportunity to scream before they were reduced to nothing but ash. The intense, consuming black flames gradually engulfed Jay himself. The Nathi people who had already descended the mountain felt the searing heat even from a distance. The following morning, Jay lay upon the pitch-black ground of the mountain. Above him, 4 little baby dragons cavorted, darting around his massive head as they played. Jay watched them with a deep sense of contentment, despite being a human in mind and consciousness. His own kind, these baby dragons, brought him joy. However, due to his colossal size, he remained prone, unable to join in their playful antics. He contented himself with watching them as they frolicked around him. Each of the baby dragons had its own unique personality. The red one was spirited and fiery, the gray one playful and mischievous, while the white and blue ones remained calm and preferred to stay close to Jay. These two were the female dragons, a fact that pleased him. People of all ages began to gather, drawn by the sight of the baby dragons and the joyous realization that they were the descendants of their powerful guardian. These new dragonlings had appeared seemingly out of nowhere. The only one among them who had a clue about the origin of the baby dragons was the young man who had placed the eggs in the funeral pyre. Initially, the baby dragons displayed a bit of aggression toward the humans. Having only seen their parent, Jay, during their birth, they found the humans unfamiliar. The red baby dragon, in particular, leaped forward, flapping its wings and screeching at the Nathi people. In response, Jay let out a powerful growl, a sound that reverberated with authority and discipline. This growl had a remarkable effect on the baby dragons, who immediately submitted and began to crawl about like obedient children. The young people watching were somewhat intimidated by Jay's growl, but the adults understood that he was simply disciplining his young ones. Jay's might as a dragon made it easy for him to instill discipline and intimacy in his baby dragons. This was in stark contrast to Daenerys Targaryen's struggles to educate and control her unruly dragons, a challenge she faced due to her perceived weakness. The dragons recognized strength and strong will, and Jay's dominance was unquestionable. With the baby dragons around, Jay found that he didn't have much time for boredom. He had to reprimand them from time to time, as their playful antics could lead to unintended destruction. If not controlled properly, their unruly behavior could become a significant headache. However, they were gradually growing more accustomed to the people of Noth. The baby dragons typically only showed aggression when they were annoyed, but they learned to keep their tempers in check, especially when Jay was present. They stayed within the boundaries of the mountain, always within Jay's watchful gaze. Despite Jay's strict rules, the curious gray dragon occasionally tried to venture beyond the mountain's boundaries. However, the corner of Jay's eye was quick to catch the wayward gray dragon's attempts. Whenever the gray dragon strayed too far, Jay would not permit it to leave the mountain. Even when the gray dragon grew hungry, Jay refused to let it approach the food he had brought for the other dragons. The gray one would protest with its little body, but Jay's growl was enough to make it retreat to a corner of the cave, its eyes filled with tears, a display of emotion Jay had never encountered in the tales of Game of Thrones or House of the Dragons. Chapter 7. As the days passed, Jay devoted himself to keeping the baby dragons in check. He toyed with the idea of returning to Valyria to search for more dragon eggs, but he ultimately dismissed the notion. The young dragons were still far too inexperienced to fly, let alone journey to such a perilous place. Having gained a deep understanding of their individual natures, Jay decided it was time to give them names. Naming them early felt right. The red dragon, spirited and fierce, was bestowed the name Exile, after a mighty red dragon king from one of Jay's favorite anime. The name perfectly suited him, given his scales blazed like a roaring flame. Next was the mischievous gray dragon, always playing little tricks and occasionally annoying Jay. Jay decided to name him Daenerys, a name that embodied his cheeky and devilish nature. Then there was the white dragon, Jay's absolute favorite. Graceful and enchanting, she outshone the others in beauty. Jay named her Moon, a name that captured her elegance, akin to the radiant moonlight. Finally, there was the calm yet powerful blue dragon. Her demeanor mirrored the tranquil sea, but when provoked, she displayed a fierce as violent sea. Jay chose the name Sapphire for her, a name befitting her precious and vibrant blue scales, reminiscent of the deep sea. With their new names, Exile, Daenerys, Moon, and Sapphire, the baby dragons now had identities that resonated with their distinct personalities. As time flowed on, the baby dragons transformed into obedient teenagers. They were no longer constantly confined to their cave, and this freedom allowed for more natural growth. Each of them had grown to a size of 10 meters, a significant increase from their early days. There was, however, an incident where they nearly turned the entire forest to ashes. Fortunately, Jay intervened swiftly, extinguishing the flames. Otherwise, there might not have been any Nothi people left to serve him. Jay took it upon himself to instill discipline when necessary. A swift whip of his tail, while not overly forceful, was enough to make a point. The young dragons, understanding Jay's expectations, showed remarkable restraint, especially when interacting with the human children. They refrained from harming or burning them, even as they played together. In a curious turn of events, these children became the dragons' attendants, tending to them by massaging their bodies, brushing their scales, and bringing them hunted animals to eat. The one thing the young dragons refused to allow was anyone riding on their backs. They held their heads high with a pride that made such a notion unthinkable. Only if Jay were to insist might they make an exception, but Jay never pushed the matter. But Jay did occasionally grant young people who assisted him with various tasks, such as brushing his scales, cleaning his teeth, or tidying his surroundings, the privilege of flying on his back. They cherished the exhilarating experience and eagerly anticipated their next turn. As they worked diligently to impress Jay, even some of the adults sought the chance to ride on his back. During these times, slaver ships occasionally approached, inquiring about the fate of their people who had set out to raid Noth. Jay took advantage of these opportunities to instruct the young dragons on how to deal with invaders. Exile, in particular, was determined to impress Jay, ensuring that none of the invaders escaped his fiery breath. In these confrontations, Jay would capture one or two of the slavers to read their memories, learning about the world and their language. To his surprise, he discovered that he belonged to the era of the Mad King's reign. What perplexed him was that during this period, dragons were considered unhatchable for some unknown reason. Yet he had managed to hatch 4 dragons. The only conclusion he could draw was that the thinness of mana in the world had made it challenging to hatch dragons. Jay's unique method of using his own flames as a source of mana had allowed him to successfully hatch the 4 dragons. He hypothesized that when the red comet appeared, mana would return to its previous abundance, rendering his flame unnecessary for dragon hatching. Since ships that ventured in the direction of Noth never seemed to return, leaving traders and slavers to regard the sea near Noth Island as a forbidden and perilous stretch of water. They speculated that a sea monster lurking near the island constantly attacked any passing ships. Chapter 8. Jay discovered news of Robert's rebellion in Westeros from an unwitting trader who served as his makeshift newspaper. While he didn't have much respect for the Targaryen rule, which appeared to be in trouble, he felt the urge to get involved, but not as someone's sidekick. But then, he had a change of heart. With his long life and nothing else to do, he realized it was quite dull to hide like a dragon on some remote island. Perhaps it was better to become a prominent figure in this world, even ruling it. However, he knew humans wouldn't accept a monster as their ruler, even if he could unleash flames. So, he needed a mediator to help him rule, someone who could be even better than both Daenerys and Jon Snow. That's when Jay thought of Elia and her children. They could be valuable pawns to use before he faded away into the world as a monster. His goal was to prevent a tragic event during the fall of King's Landing, the brutal demise of Princess Elia Martell and her innocent children. He planned to kidnap them. Jay's emotions were deeply affected as a reader, especially by the horrifying actions of Ser Gregor Clegane in the book. He wished for a painful fate for the Mountain until the end of the series in his previous life. Jay didn't hold much regard for Rhaegar Targaryen, whom he considered an idiot for causing an unnecessary war. Rhaegar's mad pursuit of dragon dreams, misinterpreting the prophecy of the three-headed dragon, had led him to seduce Lyanna Stark, nearly extinguishing the Dragon Lord bloodline. Jay felt pity for such a man who was blind to the goodness he had around him, as he had 3 children with different women, which he mistakenly believed fulfilled the prophecy of the three-headed dragon. Poor Elia, who had become barren after giving birth to Aegon, had suffered the loss of her 2 beautiful children due to Rhaegar's actions along with her most tragic death. With a determination burning in his eyes, Jay resolved to get involved in the events of Robert's rebellion. He knew he needed to prepare his young ones for this journey. After catching a massive whale from the sea, Jay returned to his resting place and summoned his young ones. They gathered around him, waiting for their meal. Jay with a burst of black flames, they feasted on the scorched whale together. Later, with 3 mighty roars that echoed through the mountains, Jay summoned the Nothi people. They gathered, puzzled and anxious, to hear what their guardian had to say. In a deep, rumbling voice, Jay addressed them, informing them of his departure. An air of unease settled over the crowd at this unexpected news. A brave young man stepped forward, voicing their shared concern. "Guardian, we hope for your swift return," he said. Jay fixed his gaze on the young man and assured him, "I will." After all, who would want to leave such a peaceful life on Noth Island? With his young dragons following closely behind, Jay took to the sky. He couldn't contain his excitement as he spoke to his kids while flying, saying, "Let's dump in infamous King's Landing, my little ones." The young dragons didn't fully grasp what Jay meant, but they could sense his enthusiasm, and they responded with roaring excitement of their own. It was their first adventure beyond the boundaries Jay had once set for them, and they were eager to explore the outside world. Jay shared in their excitement as well. Since Noth, the island where Jay and the baby dragons reside, is located in the Summer Sea to the south of the continent of Westeros. In order to reach King's Landing, Jay needed to fly northward from Noth. So they flew while maintaining a northward direction with the hope of eventually reaching the vicinity of King's Landing. As Jay and his young dragons continued their journey, they encountered a massive storm. While passing through the turbulent weather, the young dragons clung to Jay's back, following his instructions. When they grew tired, they rested on Jay's back like children. Jay was pleased to see his young ones enjoying the adventure. Days passed, and Jay, being an adult dragon, had no issues with long-distance travel. However, the young dragons started to tire. Periodically, he allowed them to hunt in the sea and have a meal on his back. Soon, the sight of land appeared on the horizon. As they got closer to the island, Jay ascended higher into the sky, sensing the presence of life in the distance. From his observations, he was certain that the island was Lys, one of the free cities, which confirmed he was heading in the right direction. Jay had no intention of landing there and continued his journey. As time passed, Jay journeyed past Stepstone, Tarth, Stone Dance, nearing the vicinity of Driftmark, once ruled by House Valyrian from the Castle High Tide. However, the young dragons on Jay's back started to protest. They weren't allowed to eat or leave Jay's back, despite their protests. Jay tried to calm them down with a gentle growl. Eventually, the iconic island of Dragonstone came into view, causing excitement in Jay after their long journey. This excitement even piqued the curiosity of the young dragons, momentarily forgetting their fatigue and hunger. Jay gently landed near Dragonstone, the castle atop the cliff, and then plunged into the sea to catch a huge shark for the young ones. After roasting it for them, Jay made his way towards King's Landing. At that point, Igneel and Moon expressed interest in accompanying Jay. However, Jay firmly instructed them to stay on the island, warning them to attack if strangers approached too closely. With that, Jay took to the sky, heading towards King's Landing. Chapter 9. Jay flew as swiftly as he could towards King's Landing, with only a vague notion that it lay between the sea and a merging river. His target was Blackwater Bay. As he neared, he spotted armies with the banners of the north, Baratheons, and Arryn in the distance, all marching towards King's Landing. Additionally, he noticed the Lannister army stationed at the gates of the city. Before he could become a nuisance to Tywin Lannister, Jay decided to approach the Silent Wolf within the marching Northern army. As the Silent Wolf, Ned Stark, led his bannermen and their allied forces towards King's Landing, a deafening roar from the sky sent tremors through the ground. Horses panicked, and the marching armies came to a sudden halt. They gazed upward in fear, and their hearts pounded as they witnessed a massive comet, cloaked in black flames, descending towards the earth. From the fiery inferno emerged Jay, the colossal black dragon, who flew closer to the ground, casting a shadow of dread over the men below. Their scattered ranks bore witness to his sheer size and majesty, and fear coursed through them as they realized, the dragons have returned. Jay's eyes landed on Ned Stark, and he guessed the man's identity. As Ned Stark and the other lords watched in awe and terror, their eyes wide with disbelief, they all shared a single thought: the dragons are back. With that, Jay soared back into the sky. He had achieved his goal of seeing the honorable but idiot Ned Stark before his death, and now it was time to confront Tywin Lannister. As Tywin Lannister's army of 12,000 men stood at the gates of King's Landing, he professed his loyalty to King Aerys Targaryen. While Varys advised the king to keep the gates locked, Aerys chose to heed Grand Maester Pycelle's counsel and opened the gates for Tywin's forces. Once inside the city, the men from the Westerlands began to ransack and plunder King's Landing. However, as the grim realization dawned that the city was lost, Aerys issued a horrifying command. He ordered his pyromancer, Rossert, to set fire to the hidden caches of wildfire throughout the city, intending to leave nothing behind but ashes and bones. He then turned to his king's guard, Jaime Lannister, the only knight present, and commanded him to assassinate Tywin and bring his head to Aerys. Instead of obeying this cruel order, Jaime confronted Rossert and slew him. Upon realizing that Aerys would simply give the same order to another pyromancer, Jaime turned back to the Red Keep, determined to end Aerys' madness once and for all. But in that fateful moment, as Westerland soldiers continued to flood into King's Landing, an earth-shattering roar pierced the air. Both attackers and defenders turned their eyes to the source of the deafening sound. At first, they saw only a distant speck in the sky, but it swiftly grew, taking the form of an enormous shadow. With a mighty exhalation of black flames, Jay the dragon emerged from the fiery inferno. He unleashed his terrible power upon the Lannister army and their bannermen, engulfing them in his relentless flames. The very earth trembled as he wrought fiery devastation, reducing many to ashes. In the midst of this chaos, even some of the city guards met a fiery end by accident, caught in the dragon's relentless assault. Tywin Lannister could only watch in horror as his once formidable army was reduced to naught but ashes by Jay's unstoppable onslaught. The sight was beyond anything he had ever imagined, a dragon materializing out of thin air to single-handedly obliterate his forces. His hands trembled with fear, and he felt a cold sweat breaking out on his brow. The world seemed to blur as he witnessed the relentless torrent of black flames. The torrent of black flames seemed to consume everything in its path. Jay's destruction halted, leaving Tywin to grasp the gravity of the situation. With a powerful beat of his wings, Jay ascended to the top of the Red Keep, leaving devastation in his wake. The ancient stronghold groaned and crumbled beneath the force of his landing. There, atop the shattered remains, Jay unfurled his massive wings, a proclamation of his dominance echoed by a deafening roar that resounded through the beleaguered city, declaring himself as the king of the moment. Chapter 10. For a moment, Jay's draconic instincts took over, and he nearly forgot his primary purpose for being in King's Landing. His fiery presence had nearly reduced the Red Keep to ruins, but he suddenly remembered his mission, to rescue Elia Martell and her children. With great effort, he shifted his focus away from his destructive urges. The Red Keep, though battered, stood resilient, and Jay's heart pounded with anticipation as he honed in on the presence of the princess and her precious children in Maegor's Holdfast. To his relief, he easily detected their presence and he felt an undeniable pull, drawing him toward them. Inside, he sensed Princess Rhaenys hiding under a Rhaegar's bed, her eyes filled with fear and tears. While Elia Martell was attempting to comfort her son in nursery room, Prince Aegon, who had been awakened by the turmoil caused by Jay's arrival. With a calculated move, Jay decided to employ his newfound talents, a blend of illusion and enhanced mind-reading abilities. The looming presence of the dragon outside the Red Keep had instilled fear in those within. The castle's inhabitants were hesitant to step outside, and the Lannister soldiers were reluctant to enter, dreading the fiery fate they'd witnessed earlier. Jay focused his mind-reading ability on Rhaenys, eager to learn more about her father. After gleaning the information he sought, he devised a plan. To coax them out, he would conjure an illusion of Rhaegar, hoping it would lure Princess Elia and her children from the Holdfast. Without this ruse, they might remain hidden, paralyzed by their fear of him. In the midst of her fear and sorrow, Rhaenys Targaryen cowered beneath her bed in the Rhaegar's bed. Tears streamed down her face as she grieved for her father, Rhaegar, and the chaos that engulfed King's Landing. Suddenly, a voice, so familiar yet unexpected, broke through the shadows, calling her name softly. Rhaenys, the voice gently beckoned. Rhaenys, her eyes wide with astonishment, cautiously peered out from her hiding place. "Father. Is that truly you?" From the darkness emerged a tall man, his silver hair and violet eyes identical to her father's. But there was something different about him, something comforting in an inexplicable way. "Rhaegar, Jay," disguised as Rhaegar Targaryen speaking softly. "Rhaenys, it is I, your father. Please, come out from under the bed. You need not be afraid." Rhaenys, from under the bed, tears still falling. "Father, is it truly you? Are you alive?" Rhaegar, Jay with a gentle tone. "Yes, my dearest, it is indeed me. I know you've endured much, and I am here to safeguard you." Rhaenys, emerging from under the bed, her eyes red from weeping. "Father, I heard what happened to you. They said bad people killed you." Rhaegar, Jay enfolding Rhaenys in his embrace while making feel Rhaenys his embrace using mind ability. "I understand, my sweet girl. It was a tumultuous and perilous time, but I am with you now. I've come to ensure your safety." Rhaenys, her voice quivering. "But what about Mother and Aegon? Are they safe as well?" Rhaegar, Jay, "They are safe, and we shall soon be reunited." Rhaenys, looking up with a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Where are we going, Father?" Rhaegar, Jay, "It is a secret place, known only to us Targaryens. You shall be protected there. We will ensure that you grow strong and wise, just as your mother and I always wished." Rhaenys, wiping away her tears. "All right, Father. I trust you." Rhaegar, Jay, "That's my brave girl. Let us depart now, and remember, I am here to watch over you." While Rhaenys gains trust in her father's presence, Jay, disguised as an illusion of Rhaegar, moves towards outside Maegor's Holdfast. At that same moment, as Jay approached Elia Martell disguised as the illusion of Rhaegar, Elia Martell stood by her infant son Aegon's crib, whispering comforting words to him. Elia Martell, whispering to Aegon in the crib. "Show, my sweet boy. Everything will be all right. Mother is here." Suddenly, a familiar voice spoke her name, and she turned to see someone she thought was lost forever. Rhaegar, Jay, disguised as Rhaegar Targaryen softly. Elia Martell, startled, she turns to look. "Rhaegar. Is that really you? How can this be?" Rhaegar, Jay nodding sadly. "Yes, my love, it's me. I've come to see you one last time." With tears in her eyes, she reached out to hug her beloved Rhaegar, only to find he was intangible. Jay, as Rhaegar's illusion, gently hugged her from behind. Rhaegar, Jay, as the illusion comforting Elia. "What happened cannot be changed, Elia." Elia Martell, her eyes still streaming with tears, struggled to accept the reality of her husband's death. She loved him deeply, even after his perceived betrayal. Her voice shook as she spoke. Elia Martell, crying. "You're gone, you left us alone." Rhaegar, Jay with remorse in his voice. "I have wronged you, Elia. I'm sorry." but let me make amends." He motioned for her to follow him, and Rhaegar's illusion began to walk out of the nursery. Elia, with her son Aegon clutched tightly in her arms, hurriedly followed, overcome with the longing to be with her husband once more. As they emerged from the nursery, they were met by the sight of a massive dragon, Jay, waiting for them. "Rhaegar," Jay softly extending his hand, "Come, Elia, let's go." Tears still in her eyes, Elia looked at Rhaenys, who was tightly gripping the dragon's saddle. With a burst of courage, she approached the dragon, seeing Rhaegar's illusion standing beside Jay. Elia's heart raced as she was lifted from the ground by an invisible force, making her fly towards the dragon's saddle. Panic briefly overcame her, but she saw Rhaegar waving his hand at her with tearful eyes before he disappeared. Elia cried out, "No. Rhaenys, Mama, I'm scared. Will this dragon eat us?" Elia held her daughter close, comforting her as she clung to the saddle. Their world spun as they left the ground, carried away by the colossal dragon who had fulfilled their escape. With a mighty roar, Jay carried Elia, Aegon, Rhaenys. As the massive dragon, Jay, carried Elia, Aegon, and Rhaenys away from King's Landing, the people of the city watched in awe. Their gazes were locked onto the sky, where the majestic creature disappeared. Meanwhile, Ned Stark and his army arrived at King's Landing to find a scene of devastation. The city had suffered greatly from Jay's fiery wrath. Burned bodies and the aftermath of destruction were all around. With the hostages gone, Tywin Lannister had no choice but to negotiate with Robert Baratheon. He offered the head of the Mad King and promised funds to help rebuild the city, seeking some form of redemption for not swearing loyalty early. On that fateful day, the entire world learned of the return of dragons, as the legend of Jay's existence and power spread far and wide. Chapter 11. As Jay carried Elia, Aegon, and Rhaenys away from King's Landing, he was careful not to fly too fast, ensuring their safety and comfort during the journey. His gentle pace, however, led to a longer travel time than he had expected. Unbeknownst to Jay, his young dragons, Igneel and Dyavel, were causing quite a commotion on Dragonstone. Accustomed to their secluded life on Noth, they didn't fully understand the customs and behaviors of the native inhabitants. They engaged in mischief, like stealing sheep from the locals, and sometimes frightened the island's residents. Their playful and curious nature often led them into trouble. Meanwhile, Rhaella Targaryen, who had fled King's Landing with her young son, Viserys, had also found refuge on Dragonstone. They had escaped the horrors of the city and arrived on the island, seeking safety. However, a tense encounter unfolded when Igneel and Dyavel, attracted by something they couldn't quite understand, approached Rhaella and Viserys. The master-at-arms of the Red Keep, Ser Willem Darry, drew his sword to protect the queen and her son from the approaching dragons. The young dragons, not appreciating the hostility, began gathering flames in their mouths, ready to defend themselves if necessary, and to satisfy their curiosity about the newcomers. Then Rhaella bravely stepped forward, signaling her knights to lower their weapons as she approached the young dragons. Seeing her approach, Igneel and Dyavel ceased their hostile postures and cautiously drew nearer to her. Rhaella, overcome with both wonder and fear, couldn't believe her eyes. She had never imagined being so close to living dragons, only knowing of the long-dead creatures through the castle's dragon bones. But then, from the skies, two more young dragons appeared, joining Igneel and Dyavel. Rhaella and her knights were left in awe, stunned by the unexpected arrival of more dragons. Even Ser Willem Darry, who had been protective of the queen and her son, couldn't help but entertain the notion that these dragons might be a key to their future. Perhaps, given time, they could grow and help reclaim the Iron Throne from their enemies. The desire for revenge and a longing to regain their lost power began to kindle in Rhaella's heart. Rhaella and her group were contemplating their fate and the potential power of the dragons they had encountered when a thunderous roar reverberated through the air. A massive shadow cast itself over them, causing the young dragons to excitedly take flight towards the source of the roar. Jay had noticed the presence of Rhaella and Viserys in the distance, and he swiftly altered his course, landing at a distance from them. He approached Rhaella with a slow, intimidating gait, and she and her knights were overwhelmed by the sight of the colossal dragon. Intimidated and fearful, Rhaella stepped back a few paces, and her knights advanced cautiously, their hands trembling with trepidation. As Jay stopped at a respectful distance, Elia called out to Rhaella from Jay's back, tears glistening in her eyes, exclaiming, "Mother." Rhaella was momentarily stunned before she responded, "Elia." Their heartfelt conversation was suddenly interrupted by Jay, who exclaimed, "Another human with a trace of my kind's blood." The words hung heavily in the air, and silence fell upon them. The idea of a talking dragon seemed inconceivable. Dragons were known for their roars and fire, not speech. They questioned whether it was merely a figment of their imagination. Curiosity got the better of young Rhaenys, and she inquired, "Big dragon, did you just talk right now?" Jay responded to her with a hint of humor, "Have you never seen a talking dragon, little human?" The silence among them deepened as young dragons continued to frolic around Jay's tail. Finally, Riella gathered the courage to ask, "May I know who you are?" Jay answered, adding a touch of fantasy to his words, "I am the last descendant of the King of Dragons, Bahamut." Chapter 12. Amidst the silent gathering, Riella spoke with hesitation, addressing Bahamut, "Dragon King Bahamut, I wish to strike a deal with you." Bahamut remained silent, waiting for her to continue. Riella pressed on, "If you assist us in reclaiming what rightfully belongs to us, I will do anything within my power to fulfill your request." Bahamut pondered for a moment before asking, "And may I ask anything within your power?" Riella nodded in agreement, saying, "Yes, Dragon King." Bahamut then presented his own terms, "I want your power, the power to rule the realm that you believe is rightfully yours, a power that is also within your grasp." Riella was taken aback, struggling to find a response. But Bahamut was not finished. He offered a counter deal, stating, "You are too weak to propose a deal with me, Dowager Queen of Humans. Instead, I will offer you a deal if you agree." Riella looked to Bahamut, her curiosity piqued. Bahamut continued, "If you are willing to leave Dragonstone with me, I will pledge to help you conquer Westeros in the future, uniting the realms of Westeros and Essos under the rule of one with Targaryen blood." Riella was utterly astonished by Bahamut's proposition. Bahamut asked, "So, what is your answer?" After a moment of contemplation, Riella replied, "No, I won't leave. Dragonstone is House Targaryen's ancestral seat. If I abandon it, it would mean surrendering our claim to the Seven Kingdoms. I implore you, Dragon King, to assist us in retaining Dragonstone or leave one of your kind to aid us. We would be forever grateful." Bahamut walked away from her, and with a mighty flap of his wings, he soared into the sky, carrying Elia and her children, along with the young dragons. They all followed Bahamut, leaving behind the determined but stubborn Riella. Despite Elia's pleas, Bahamut turned a blind eye to her and soared away. Riella's skepticism was not without reason. Trusting the words of a stranger, be they human or dragon, was no simple matter. Moreover, Bahamut's offer seemed beyond belief, a proposition that granted dominion over the known world. It was a promise too grand, even for a mighty dragon. However, Bahamut's intentions were sincere. He had little else to do in this unfamiliar world, and his lifespan far exceeded that of any living being. Bahamut soared through the skies, flying as fast as he could while ensuring Elia and her children were not overwhelmed by the speed or the air pressure. Moon and Sapphire, the young dragons, clung to him and did their best to shield Elia and her children from the rushing wind. Moon even used her tail to help them hold on, while Sapphire used her wings to protect the infant from the air. As the journey continued, Bahamut realized the need for breaks. Humans were not as resilient as dragons, and he didn't want Elia and her children to suffer too much from stress and hunger. So, he decided to land on an island near Tarth, allowing Elia to rest on his back while the young dragons went fishing. The young dragons returned with a massive roasted fish, providing sustenance for Elia and the children. Thirsty, Bahamut led them to a nearby pond and used his magic to create large droplets of water for them to drink. Elia and Rhaenys were amazed by Bahamut's abilities, which went far beyond the stories they had heard. Before the island's natives could gather, Bahamut took to the skies once more. This time, he even used his magic to create a protective shield for Elia, allowing him to fly at full speed while ensuring her safety. As the morning sun painted the sky, Bahamut finally reached Sunspear, the seat of House Martell. The people of Dorne were awestruck by the colossal dragon's presence. Before landing, Bahamut circled the city several times, making a grand and impressive entrance before finally touching down near Sunspear Castle with mighty roar. Chapter 13. Prince Doran Martell stood on the balcony of his castle, sleepless nights weighing heavily on him due to the turmoil of Robert's rebellion. His heart ached for his lost brother, and his only glimmer of hope was the safety of his sister, a hope he thought was fading fast. When he heard rumors of a dragon outside his castle, he dismissed them as mere tales, until he rushed out of balcony and saw the colossal black dragon with his own eyes. Fear gripped him, knowing the sheer power this creature held. History of Dorne's past triumph against a dragon flashed through his mind, but this dragon was beyond their wildest imagination. Then, to his astonishment, he saw his sister Elia standing below the dragon's chest. Emotion overwhelmed him, and tears welled in his eyes. He quickly gathered his men, his sole purpose now to reunite with his beloved sister. The dragon, for the moment, faded into the background as young dragons soared through the skies, under the watchful eye of Bahamut. As Elia waited for her brother, Bahamut couldn't help but express his impatience, asking, "Why is your brother taking so long? Is he perhaps crippled?" His words were unintentionally blunt, and Elia's response was tinged with a touch of discontent. Through their journey to Sunspear, Elia had come to understand that the so-called Dragon King was more akin to a human, yet undeniably a dragon. Though she couldn't openly defy Bahamut, she realized she could at least communicate her thoughts to him. One thing weighed heavily on her heart: Bahamut's departure from Dragonstone and his reluctance to let her remain in Sunspear. Bahamut wanted Elia to request her brother for a ship, loaded with ample provisions and supplies for their long journey for them. As Doran Martell and his 1,000-men cavalry army approached, Bahamut was puzzled by their overly cautious approach. He thought to himself, why would anyone bring such a puny force to confront a dragon? He couldn't comprehend their actions and considered them foolish. As the Dornish forces drew nearer, Bahamut decided to assert his presence and intimidate them. With 2 deliberate steps forward, he let out a deafening roar that sent shockwaves through the army. The horses, driven to panic, scattered in all directions, disregarding their riders' attempts to control them. Elia, concerned about Bahamut's actions, asked him, "Bahamut, what are you doing?" Bahamut turned to her and replied, "I will be waiting for you. Inform them to prepare the ships in 3 days, with you and your children alone." With those words, Bahamut walked away and, with a powerful sweep of his wings, took to the skies. Elia remained behind, her gaze fixed on the departing dragon, torn between uncertainty and the decisions she had made. As Bahamut prepared to depart from Westeros, he decided to offer a little assistance to Riella by dealing with the fleet of ships at Storm's End, led by Stannis Baratheon. In no time, Bahamut arrived at Storm's End, his colossal form casting a shadow over the city. To Bahamut's dismay, he found only a handful of ships docked at the shore, hardly worth his attention. However, forgetting that Stannis' siege on Dragonstone was still months away, Bahamut decided to eliminate any potential threat. Without a second thought, he unleashed torrents of black flames, reducing the ships to mere ashes. The ringing of bells echoed through the city, causing panic to ripple through the streets. Stannis rushed out to see the source of the commotion. His eyes widened in disbelief as he beheld the immense figure before him, wreathed in flames, with eyes that gleamed like molten gold. Realizing that his archers' flaming arrows were futile against this formidable adversary, Stannis watched in awe as the colossal dragon disappeared from view, only to reappear directly in front of Storm's End, facing him directly. The sheer size of Bahamut, with eyes larger than Stannis' head, left the would-be king speechless. Chapter 14. Bahamut, the colossal dragon with intellect, had no intentions of annihilating every lord in Westeros. Reducing them to ashes would only make the Targaryen rule more chaotic, and he'd be seen as nothing more than a destructive monster, even if he displayed his more human side. In this world, bloodlines mattered more than leadership, and his aim was to gain control over Westeros without eliminating key figures from the future. His grand plan required key individuals from various regions of Westeros to help him succeed. Bahamut had watched the entire series and read the books, and if he were to kill them all and intervene in every conflict, it would disrupt the natural course of events and erase important figures from the future. Instead, Bahamut chose to aid the Targaryens in their escape and bide his time. He knew that forcing them back onto the throne could result in their assassination or the people's refusal to accept them. It was wiser to wait, to grow stronger, and to return when the realm was desperate for a capable leader, tired of pretenders. In such a time, people would prioritize competence over grudges, and they would be more willing to accept a ruler based on both bloodline and capability. Bahamut knew that, and it was part of his grand plan. Bahamut's roar echoed through the castle, its force enough to make Stannis drop to his knees. The power and presence of the colossal dragon were beyond anything he had ever experienced. With a mighty flap of his wings, Bahamut soared into the sky, leaving Storm's End and Stannis far below. Before dawn approached, Bahamut returned to Sunspear, circling the castle to locate his young dragons. Soon, they emerged from a nearby garden, playing and frolicking in the garden. On Moon's back, to Bahamut's surprise, was Rhaenys, tightly clinging to her. Bahamut gently used his powers to guide Rhaenys to his own back, ensuring her safety. The sight stirred fear in Elia, who watched with trepidation from the garden along with her brother, Prince Doran. As Bahamut touched down on the shore near Sunspear, Elia rode forth on horseback, with Doran at a cautious distance. Elia rushed to her daughter, scolding her for the recklessness while offering a comforting embrace. Meanwhile, Bahamut observed his young dragons, surprised to see the growing bond between Moon and Rhaenys. Elia, stepping out from Bahamut's shade, gazed upon the colossal dragon. She felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation, her heart pounding with uncertainty. She gathered the courage to ask, "Are we leaving now, Bahamut?" Bahamut didn't respond immediately, instead fixing his gaze on the nearby river. Elia exchanged a look with her brother, Doran, who nodded in agreement with her unspoken concern. He remained cautious and unsure but decided it was best to let his sister accompany the great dragon for her safety. Taking careful steps, Doran approached Bahamut, then knelt before him. He spoke with reverence, "Dragon King, I entrust my sister and her children to your protection. Keep them safe, I beseech you." Bahamut merely cast a glance at Doran, then turned his gaze toward Elia, who hesitantly ventured a request, "Bahamut, can you reconsider bringing my mother-in-law and her child with us?" To her request, Bahamut simply replied, "No." With those words, Bahamut took to the sky once more, his mighty wings propelling him toward the shoreline. As dawn broke, Elia had to say farewell to her family. She walked with her children toward the galley that was loaded with supplies for their long journey. Her heart was heavy with uncertainty, not knowing what to expect from Bahamut and his means of transportation, as she was unfamiliar with how he would move the ships without a crew of sailors. Soon, Bahamut's colossal shadow swept over the shoreline, accompanied by his young dragons. To their amazement, Bahamut harnessed his unique abilities, lifting the ship off the ground with a display of telekinesis. Initially, this sent shivers down the spines of Elia on ship and others on the shore. However, their fear was swiftly replaced by astonishment as the galley was gently set down on Bahamut's back. The mast of the ship was carefully tethered to him with a rope to ensure it didn't hinder his flight. The scene was a breathtaking display of power. As they continued their journey, the young dragons would occasionally attempt to land on the ships, eager to play with Rhaenys. However, Bahamut sternly warned them to avoid the galley tied to his back, as any wrong move could potentially tear the ship apart. Bahamut himself refrained from eating during the journey, knowing that any abrupt movement could jeopardize the ship. Instead, the young dragons enjoyed hunting in the sea, feeding on their catches while hanging from Bahamut's long tail. Despite the occasional rocking of the ships, causing motion sickness for Elia and her children, they managed to endure the journey thanks to the provisions they had on board. After nearly a month at sea, Bahamut's heart swelled with joy as they caught sight of his favorite island, Noth, on the horizon. The long and arduous journey was finally nearing its end. Chapter 15. Knowing the peculiar nature of the butterflies on Noth, Bahamut had a plan in mind. These butterflies, due to their small wings and limited flying capabilities, mostly remained close to the ground and within the forest. They were not strong flyers and couldn't reach high altitudes. Taking this into account, Bahamut decided to make a grand entrance. As he approached Noth Island, he soared high into the sky, climbing towards the mountain peaks. With a powerful roar, he reached the mountaintop. This monumental display made the people of Noth leap for joy, as their guardian had returned to them. During his absence, not much had changed on Noth Island. As Bahamut returned, he used his telekinesis to gently lower the ship to the ground. He held the ship steady until Elia and her children disembarked, with the curious Nothi people gathering around to see the newcomers. Elia was initially cautious about meeting these strangers, but seeing that Bahamut and his young dragons were relaxed and unguarded among the people, she began to feel more at ease. She attempted to communicate with the Nothi, even though she couldn't understand their language. Bahamut, seeing Elia's confusion, explained to her that they were not allowed to leave the mountain. He warned them about a rare disease that was spread by unusual insects in the forest, which couldn't fly to high altitudes. This disease was a natural defense mechanism to protect the Nothi people from external threats. Elia agreed to follow Bahamut's instructions and remain on the mountain. Bahamut then instructed the Nothi to build huts for Elia and her children and provide them with food, ensuring their safety on the island. Rhaenys quickly became a beloved figure among the Nothy children, especially with the young dragons at her side. They treated her with tenderness and care, knowing she was brought to the island by their guardian. Rhaenys and Moon formed an inseparable bond, sharing fruits brought by the Nothy as a gesture of friendship even though Moon can't eat fruits. In return, Moon would bring fresh catches of fish and other wild creatures for Rhaenys to enjoy. While Rhaenys spent her time with Moon, Elia found herself surrounded by curious Nothy girls eager to learn about the world beyond their island. Despite the language barrier, Elia was a fast learner and picked up the Nothy language, though not without some small mistakes. The exchange of knowledge and experiences brought a sense of unity between the newcomers and the Nothy people. Elia, being cautious, occasionally approached Bahamut for conversation but remained careful not to provoke him accidentally. This cautiousness sometimes bored Bahamut. What Elia didn't know was that within the old, wise dragon was the heart of a 21-year-old youngster. A pleasant surprise for Bahamut was Aegon, who displayed remarkable bravery for his young age. At just 5 years old, he always stayed close to Bahamut, eager to learn from the dragon. Seeing Aegon's enthusiasm, Andro decided to take on the role of a teacher, providing lessons to both Rhaenys and Aegon, as well as the children of Noth. The hilltop became a makeshift school for the children, where they learned and played together. Chapter 16 Inch edited. During the 5 years on Noth Island, not much had changed. Aegon and Rhaenys continued to grow, and the young dragons, initially small, had now reached an impressive length of 30 meters. Their growth was slower compared to Drogon, possibly due to the thinner magic in Noth. Bahamut's primary concern was the development of Aegon and Rhaenys, whom he had chosen to be the future rulers of the Seven Kingdoms. He worried that the isolated environment of Noth wouldn't provide them with the necessary wisdom and strength for rulership. Thus, Bahamut contemplated the idea of relocating them to the Golden Empire, a distant land comparable in distance to Noth from Westeros. To prepare for the journey to Et, Bahamut had to overcome the challenge of having only a vague sense of the direction in which Et was located. He saw an opportunity in the 17th Azure Emperor, Bugai, who was weaker compared to his predecessors. Bugai's rule was limited to his own city, making him a potential partner for negotiation. Bahamut planned to offer his assistance and power to Bugai in exchange for resources that would create a favorable environment for the growth and development of Aegon and Rhaenys in the heart of Et. As Bahamut gathered Elia, her children, and the Nothy elders, he was surprised when the elders suggested leaving Noth Island along with him. This unexpected proposal caught him off guard. However, the Nothy's wish to leave with Bahamut presented a significant challenge. To accommodate the entire village, they would need at least 30 ships to transport everyone along with the necessary food and resources for the journey. Securing such a large number of ships on short notice seemed nearly impossible. Bahamut considered the option of stealing ships from pirates near Basilisk Isle. This plan had its advantages. Pirates were typically more agreeable targets for theft than innocent merchants. That night, Bahamut ventured alone to Basilisk Isle, where pirates often made temporary stops. The island was inhospitable for both humans and beasts, so it served as a hideout for pirates. While the pirates slumbered, Bahamut employed his magic to quietly steal their ships. When the pirates awoke in the morning, they found their vessels mysteriously absent from the shore. Unbeknownst to them, a dragon had used magic to whisk away 27 pirate ships, along with the unfortunate slaves who had stayed aboard during the night, and some pirates who met a fiery end by the hands of Bahamut's magical flames while they slept. The following morning, the shores of Noth were filled with more than 32 ships. Bahamut had returned after a successful mission to acquire the necessary vessels. However, instead of securing all the ships from pirates, he had also taken some ships from what seemed to be wealthy merchants at sea. In a show of mercy, he had left safety boats attached to all the ships he took, ensuring the safety of the occupants. Bahamut chose not to erase the memories of the people he had encountered, confident that their stories would be met with disbelief. After all, who would believe that a dragon capable of performing magic was responsible for their peculiar encounter? Chapter 17. As the ships were docked along the shore, the children of Noth danced and played in the forest, bidding a joyful farewell to their old home. Both young and old villagers began gathering the necessary resources for their upcoming journey, relying on Bahamut's provided estimates. The slaves who had been taken from the pirate ships were in awe of Bahamut's incredible abilities. His immense size and power left them speechless and terrified. Bahamut offered them their freedom in exchange for assistance in reaching Karth, as they could provide valuable directions and help operate the ships, even though Bahamut could use his magic to move the vessels swiftly in the desired direction. In just a week, the ships were fully prepared for their voyage, and with a powerful roar, Bahamut took to the sky, followed by the other 4 dragons. The ships began moving in the direction set by Bahamut and the other dragons, powered by Bahamut's magic, which allowed them to travel much faster than regular sailing ships. During the journey, many of the Nathi people struggled with seasickness. More than 2 months passed without any major disruptions until they reached the Straits of Karth. At this point, there was a toll that every passing ship needed to pay. Bahamut, in his frugal nature, used his magic to lift all the ships into the sky, creating a protective barrier to prevent sailors or travelers from falling off the ships. In the cover of night, they bypassed Karth without anyone noticing their presence. When everyone woke up, including Bahamut who had put himself to sleep to avoid frightening them with the sight of the ships floating in the air, they were greeted by the breathtaking beauty of the Jade Sea. The shores sparkled like jade itself, and the ships had already reached the shore, making it easier for them to unload their travel resources. Instead of flying, Bahamut decided to walk alongside the Nathi people, using his limbs. The former slaves, now free men, still chose to follow the Nathi people and their great elder dragon, while the young dragons continued to soar in the sky. Bahamut's imposing presence, towering over the trees, served as a deterrent to wild animals and bandits, ensuring the safety of the Nathi people during their journey. As they continued their journey through the land, the native people of ET catch a glimpse of Bahamut's presence and flee in terror. Despite their fear, Bahamut managed to capture one person without harming them, a lone traveler. From this traveler, Bahamut learned their language and the location of the city. With a sense of embarrassment, Bahamut altered their route based on this new information. What they didn't realize was that the capital city, was a port city, and they had unknowingly bypassed it. So, on this part of their journey, they traveled closer to the shore, taking in the ever-changing landscape. They saw windswept plains, rolling hills, dense jungles, lush rainforests, deep lakes, and swiftly flowing rivers. The shifting vistas held their fascination. Bahamut, feeling a bit bored, took to the sky to get a better view of their progress. From high above, he spotted the city of He couldn't help but draw parallels between ET and Imperial China from his previous life, almost as if he had stepped into the world of Xianxia. The cities in ET were grand and vast, surpassing anything he had seen in Westeros. Even its ruins were more magnificent than the great cities of the Westeros. ET was a vast and stunning land, much of it covered by dense forests and sweltering jungles. Yet, travel within this empire was efficient and secure thanks to a vast network of well-constructed stone roads, which both the Nathi people and Bahamut found to be a marvel. Chapter 18. As they drew nearer to the capital city, an emergency alarm bell rang out, causing panic within the city's walls. The city gates began to close just as Bahamut and the others approached. During their journey, Bahamut had used his magic to transfer the knowledge he had gained from the lone traveler to Elia and her children. He did this while they were resting on the shore before reaching the city. When they awoke, they were astonished to find that they now understood the local language, which had previously been alien to them. This revelation left Elia even more terrified, as it made her believe that if a dragon could perform such feats, then the bedtime stories of her youth might also be real. Currently, all the Nathi people and Elia were dressed in luxurious attire that Bahamut had obtained during his attack on the ships. These outfits were more presentable to the people of the city who lived in houses made of solid gold and dined on sweetmeats powdered with pearls and jade. The city gates were towering structures, even taller than Bahamut himself. As they approached, Bahamut noticed long-range artillery weapons positioned on the top of the city walls. He called down his young dragons to be closer to him in the sky, and they obeyed his command. The warriors of ET remained tense as they gazed at the giant beast before them, unable to believe that such a creature existed in their world. During their journey to the city, Bahamut instructed Elia to maintain an aura of queenliness and asked her to speak with the representatives of City until he signaled for her to step back. Although she was hesitant at first, she had no choice and wanted to set an example as a model mother for her children. Elia proceeded with grace and dignity, every step carrying the regal aura of a queen. Her presence was as elegant as any woman Bahamut had ever seen in this world. She walked between Bahamut's massive limbs, each step filled with grace and purpose. Bahamut moved forward in tandem with Elia, creating an even more intimidating spectacle for the city guards and higher-ups who watched in awe. The other 4 young dragons advanced alongside Bahamut, matching his pace. The city dwellers observed the graceful woman walking with dragons at her back, and to them, she seemed like a sorceress. Then, Elia abruptly halted her steps and fixed her gaze on a man who appeared to be the special among forces stationed on the city wall. She spoke in their language, which sounded stilted to the men and everyone else on the city wall. They couldn't comprehend how this woman, who was clearly not from their region, could suddenly speak their language so fluently. Unbeknownst to them, Bahamut employed his magic to ensure that everyone could hear her. Elia addressed them calmly, and her words reached the ears of everyone in the city. She said, "Warriors of ET, I come in peace, seeking an audience with your ruler as a friend and ally." Her request hung in the air, leaving the city in a state of wonder and anticipation. Chapter 19. As the gate slowly opened, revealing a man leading a formidable group of 100 mounted soldiers, they approached Elia. Stopping just 20 feet away from her, the man, whom they called the Marshal of the Emperor's army, introduced himself with a deep bow, saying, "Greetings, fair lady. I am Marshal Chang Jin, commander of the Emperor's loyal forces." Elia addressed Chang Jin with a serene demeanor, saying, "Greetings, Marshal Chang Jin. I am Elia Martell, the former queen of the 7 kingdoms in Westeros. I have come in search of an audience with the Azure Emperor, Bugai." With caution, Marshal Chang Jin addressed Elia while keeping a watchful eye on the formidable dragons behind her. "Your Royal Highness, I can make arrangements, but..." As Chang Jin hesitated and fear flashed in his eyes when he glanced at Bahamut, Elia reassured him with a deep understanding, "They won't harm anyone." Chang Jin regained his composure and replied calmly, "In that case, Your Royal Highness, allow me to make arrangements for the accommodation and safety of your people. I shall ensure everything is prepared for your journey." Elia, displaying great courage, walked towards Bahamut and said firmly, "No need, Marshal. All that is required is to ensure the safety and well-being of my people. I will make my own way to meet the Emperor." Bahamut, taken aback by Elia's resolute words, summoned his magical power and gently lifted Elia along with her children onto his back. With a mighty roar that startled the nearby horses, Bahamut soared into the sky, heading towards the palace on the hill, resembling a medieval-era fortress in the distance. The young dragons followed Bahamut with roars that echoed through the surroundings. Chang Jin, a seasoned veteran of many wars, had never felt so powerless in front of a woman. He knew he had to tread carefully, unsure of how the beast behind her would react. He marveled at the sight of this woman who stood her ground against his imposing presence. And to add to his surprise, she rode the creature like a flying horse, a feat beyond his wildest imagination. Aegon, Elia's young son, watched in amazement as he witnessed a new, powerful side of his mother. It was a revelation to him, seeing his mother command such respect and fear from the imposing men. Though Elia felt a hint of fear herself, she drew strength from the powerful dragon standing beside her. Elia gazed in the direction of a distant fortress, which was enclosed within an extravagant castle. The castle was a testament to the overwhelming wealth of the emperors of ET. Even the roof tiles of the castle were crafted from pure gold, a sight that left Bahamut equally astounded. The riches of ET were on full display, from the grandeur of the castle to the opulence of the fortress. The people of Een City gazed in awe as a colossal shadow soared above them, casting a sense of wonder and silence across the city. It was an unusual occurrence for the bustling city to fall silent during the daytime. With a thunderous thud, Bahamut landed in a large training area near the palace. The warriors in the training area panicked, fleeing in all directions as they saw the enormous beast approaching. Elia and her children remained on Bahamut's back, watching the scene unfold. Soon, the Azure Emperor emerged from the palace with his high-ranking officials. He was adorned in a robe that was not only elaborate but also richly embroidered. The Emperor's headdress, often bearing a crown or various ornamental symbols, marked his prestigious rank. His long gray beard signified him as a middle-aged man. Despite his status as the Emperor, fear still lingered in his eyes as he approached Bahamut. The Emperor's courage lay in the presence of the few sorcerers at his court, whom he believed would protect him from the beast if necessary. Chapter 20. The Emperor, in a deep and trembling voice, questioned Elia while deliberately avoiding Bahamut's penetrating gaze. "Who are you, and what do you want from me?" As he had been waiting for the perfect moment, Bahamut decided to make his grand introduction. With a voice that resonated with power, he declared, "I am the King of Dragons, Bahamut Draconis Rixarian." His introduction was accompanied by the mighty roars of the young dragons that followed him, filling the sky with their presence. Bahamut had struggled with the length of his made-up name until now, but at this moment, he realized it was fitting. Elia and her children were taken aback by Bahamut's self-proclaimed grand lengthy name he never mentioned. They had never heard him use such a long name before. A profound silence fell over them all, with no one daring to move an inch. Then, after a pause, the emperor asked with cautious curiosity, "Dragon King, why do you seek my audience?" He had initially assumed that the lady on the back of the dragon was the master of this colossal beast, but it seemed he was mistaken. Bahamut posed a pointed question, "Are you a weak ruler?" The question sent a wave of anger rippling through the people behind the emperor, though they concealed their emotions. An impulsive individual among them couldn't restrain himself and dared to confront Bahamut, "You insult his highness." In response, Bahamut released an intense wave of heat and thunderous power, causing everyone to cover their ears and take a step back. However, Bahamut ensured that Elia remained unharmed. He thundered, "I am the ruler of the sky, and he is the ruler of the land. Who are you to question me, servants of his rule?" Fear rippled through the crowd, and guards readied their spears while archers nocked their arrows. Before Bahamut could utter another word, the emperor interjected, "Forgive my men's rudeness," and gestured for his guards to stand down. Emperor then cautiously asked, "Dragon King, I do not find your words to be an insult, but rather a critique. What is it that you are pointing out?" Bahamut continued, "As a descendant of the Azure Emperors, you should possess much more power than what is contained within these city walls. Yet you allow pretenders to call themselves emperors and your bloodline to be belittled." The emperor fell into a contemplative silence, fully aware of the weakening state of his lineage, as regional princedoms continued to rise in power. Moreover, the loss of control over Leng about 400 years ago and the emergence of the self-proclaimed Orange Emperor, Pol Quo, on the northern frontiers posed significant threats. Additionally, to the east, beyond the Golden Empire's borders, in the city of Carcosa on the Hidden Sea, an exile claimed to be the 69th Yellow Emperor, representing a dynasty that had fallen 1,000 years ago. Bahamut finally revealed his intentions, "I am here to make a deal if you are willing," his giant eyes focused on the emperor. Chapter 21. The emperor paused, considering Bahamut's proposal. Then, Bahamut declared, "I can grant you dominion over all of ET, a power greater than any Azure Emperor that has ever existed. Only if you are willing." The emperor's blood pulsed with a newfound vitality, yet he maintained caution, gripping his hand tightly. "And what must I do in return?" he inquired. Bahamut responded, "Appoint me as the one who wields power in your realm for a span of 12 years. In return, I will elevate you to the esteemed position of the greatest emperor under the heavens before my departure." On that day, Azure Emperor Bugai issued an imperial decree that astonished his subjects. It named Bahamut as his second chancellor, a position of unparalleled authority second only to the emperor and empress. Throughout history, there had only ever been one chancellor, but now, a dragon also held the esteemed title. The people were bewildered by this edict, struggling to comprehend how a dragon could hold such a role, since they didn't witness the events in the palace. As chancellor, Bahamut was granted a residence close to the palace. Emperor also ordered the construction of a grand podium for Bahamut to rest upon when needed. In addition, the emperor provided a residence for Elia and her children, as well as the Nathi people who had accompanied them. With Bahamut's newfound position came an abundance of resources, and he used his influence to appoint esteemed scholars and martial masters for both Rhaenys and Aegon. These mentors provided them with a more comprehensive education than Bahamut could offer with his fragmented knowledge. Emperor Bugai fulfilled his end of the bargain, allowing Bahamut to create his own army even a real chancellor is not allowed to do. While it was a difficult decision, the emperor had faith that the dragon would honor their agreement and not betray him as a human might. Emperor Bugai, often belittled as the weakest ruler of his time, had underestimated the intelligence and capabilities of the beast before him. He had been given a unique opportunity to achieve his desires, but he let his guard down, failing to comprehend the true depth of Bahamut's wisdom and power. Bahamut, however, was determined to keep his promise. He would elevate Emperor Bugai to become the greatest ruler, one who would unite the entire land, much like the legendary god emperors of old. But once Bahamut departed, the emperor would once again return to being one of the weakest and most hopeless rulers in the history of ET. On that fateful day, Bahamut issued another imperial edict in the emperor's name, commanding the summoning of an army 30,000 strong. Their purpose was to deal with General Pol Quo, known as the Hammer of the Jogos Nai. This ambitious general had bestowed upon himself imperial honors, declaring himself the first of the Orange Emperors. His capital was the sprawling garrison city known as Traitor Town. Bahamut's audacious move sent heralds to all the regional princedoms, warlords, and petty kings. The message was clear: they must bend their knees before the emperor, or face the full force of his wrath. This bold action by the dragon sent shivers down the emperor's spine. He had never anticipated that Bahamut would challenge the entirety of ET in his name. As an emperor with no heir but a few daughters, he was terrified at the prospect of losing his head so soon. But it was too late. The dragon had already set events in motion, and the emperor had no choice but to watch helplessly. Chapter 22. A mighty army, 30,000 strong, had gathered and was now marching towards Traitor Town to confront General Pol Quo, the infamous hammer of the Jogos Nai. Pol Quo was a formidable general, backed by a substantial number of loyalists, like many other commanders in the emperor's service. However, his recent successes had inflated his ego, causing him to question the worthiness of his loyalty to the emperor. Pol Quo had earned his fearsome reputation by fearlessly defeating the Jogos Nai, a mounted warrior race even more ferocious than the Dothraki. Bahamut understood that, in the volatile landscape of ET, the loyalty of the warriors often lay more with their respective generals than with the emperor himself. Bahamut's strategy aimed at either bringing the generals under his influence or removing them from the equation altogether. If his plan unfolded as intended, he hoped that even if these generals didn't pledge loyalty, their successors might. Marching out with an army of 30,000 had left the defense of Een City vulnerable, guarded only by a meager force of 1,000 warriors, while the emperor's army, consisting of 30,000 strong men, was en route to confront General Pol Quo and his 8,000 soldiers. The emperor's unconventional move had left neighboring regional princes bewildered. Many saw this as a ludicrous blunder, and it fueled doubts about the emperor's worthiness to rule. This created an opportunity for them to plot the city's overthrow before the emperor's army returned, believing that without the chess piece in play, the battle would be over. However, they sorely underestimated Bahamut's cunning and the speed at which he operated. Allowing their guard to drop was exactly what Bahamut had wanted, and the dragons would return to Een City at the perfect moment to defy their expectations. Over 20,000 forces had united, setting aside their differences for a common goal. Their plan was clear: overthrow the current emperor and later decide who among them would ascend the throne. This pact solidified their agreement. The dragon, along with his army of 30,000, had been away from Een City for over 3 days. This information was gleaned from spies discreetly placed within the emperor's palace. Now, a formidable force of more than 20,000 warriors had gathered, and they were determined to launch their assault on the city walls. Their intent was to strike during the night, as there was no need to declare war. The emperor's recent decree had already declared his position and intent. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown under the cloak of darkness. As night shrouded the city, the alarm bells rang out from the walls, alerting the defenders to the ominous movement in the darkness. The walls were illuminated with the fiery glow, and the emperor's forces prepared to defend their city. However, the emperor's meager force couldn't adequately cover the extensive city walls, making them vulnerable to a siege. The opposing army advanced, their siege engines ready to breach the sturdy iron gates, although the frame was constructed from unyielding stone. But, to everyone's astonishment, a deafening roar echoed from the distance, and 4 colossal shadows emerged into view, illuminated by the moon's pale light. One of the immense figures rained down torrents of black flames upon the approaching siege engines, causing them to explode in fiery destruction. The other 4 looming shadows unleashed waves of flames upon the enemy forces, spreading chaos and terror among their ranks. The night was filled with the desperate cries of men fighting for their lives, and the onlookers atop the city walls stood in stunned silence. The emperor, too, felt his blood boil as he gazed upon the nightmarish scene, marked by fire and ashes. Chapter 23. Amidst the chaos of battle, Bahamut felt a surge of madness coursing through his veins, an unbridled and relentless desire to incinerate everything in his path. His mind echoed with a single word, repeated again and again: burn, burn, burn. He unleashed his fiery fury without discrimination, for in his draconic form, there was no room for mercy. He turned his searing breath upon all who opposed him, reducing them to ash. Princes, warlords, and soldiers alike fell to his relentless flames, and nothing was spared. Their lifeless forms were left half-burned, to be buried by the soldiers left behind in the city, preventing the spread of disease and averting any potential curses from enemy sorcerers. The army that had marched toward Traitor Town returned, carrying the severed head of General Pol Qo, their mission accomplished. Before their arrival, Bahamut had turned the entire town to smoldering ruins, leaving nothing but devastation in his wake. Pol Qo, too, was spared from complete immolation, his body bearing the scars of half-burned flesh. Upon reaching the Traitor Town, the soldiers were grateful that they had not incurred the wrath of the magical beast, having witnessed the desolation that was once Traitor Town. Without waiting for the main army to return to the capital city, Bahamut issued orders to the generals, instructing them to send officials to the princedoms situated near the capital. These officials carried the news of the devastation Bahamut had wrought on the enemy forces. In a state of sheer terror, the princedoms swiftly yielded to the emperor's influence, and his fame began to spread throughout ET, albeit with some delay. Many princedoms and petty kings surrendered their thrones and came to the emperor in person, seeking his favor. To their astonishment, it was not the emperor but Bahamut himself who spoke on his behalf. The colossal, intelligent monster left them bewildered and in disbelief, for they could hardly fathom how the emperor had gained the favor of such an extraordinary being. They questioned whether Bahamut was truly a dragon, for they were aware of dragons from the Valyrian civilization in the past. Some knew of a Valyrian noblewoman who had married an emperor and kept a dragon at the court. However, there were no records of dragons capable of speech, and this new revelation left them awestruck and perplexed. Many of the princedoms remained defiant, refusing to surrender to the emperor and believing they could withstand the might of the flying beast and the emperor's forces. Bahamut, accompanied by just 5,000 men, flew towards these fortresses, while his other forces were scattered across different cities to ensure they operated under the emperor's rule. As Bahamut approached one of the fortresses, he encountered the arch-nemesis of dragons, the scorpion. However, Bahamut did not dodge the spears and arrows shot at him. Instead, he created a barrier of air to deflect the projectiles. To his surprise, an unforeseen event unfolded as he neared the fortress. Numerous long iron chains materialized out of thin air, ensnaring him and forcing him to land on the walls of the fortress. Those who dared to approach him were reduced to ashes. Bahamut was left confounded, wondering why the chains continued to bind him even when he attempted to break free using his immense strength. The answer was clear: magic was at play. Chapter 24. Bahamut closely observed the chains that bound him while maintaining a protective barrier around himself. To his surprise, he realized that these chains weren't made of ordinary metal, they were something dark and infused with a powerful magic. Bahamut could sense the suffering and cries of people echoing within the chains. He concentrated on detecting the source of this sinister magic using his magic, and his keen senses led him to a group of individuals watching from a distance. Even in the darkness of night, Bahamut could easily recognize these figures. In the books of A World of Ice and Fire, there was only one group of people known for wielding such sinister black magic and concealing their identities behind masks, the Shadowbinders of Ashai. These sorcerers were considered the darkest of all, and their magic was strongest during the night. With a thunderous roar, Bahamut declared words that resounded throughout the fortress: "You've chosen the wrong adversary." He unleashed an intense wave of heat, creating flames in the darkness that weakened the shadow magic. As the magic lost its grip on the chains, the Shadowbinders attempted to flee, but it was too late. They were consumed by black flames, their sinister powers no match for Bahamut's fiery wrath. Bahamut's encounter with the Shadowbinders had left him restless and consumed by anger, like a vengeful force of nature descending from the heavens. He unleashed his fury upon the fortress, and even as the men and women within knelt in submission, his eyes showed no sign of mercy. His anger seemed unending, driven by the knowledge that they had hired the Shadowbinders. When the army finally arrived at the fortress, they found only flames and ashes. As Bahamut's wrath subsided, he was filled with regret for the destruction he had wrought. This was a stark reminder of why dragons were often seen as creatures of unparalleled destruction. Their anger knew no bounds, and they would not stop until their goals were achieved. Generals from the army politely approached Bahamut, seeking to understand the events that had led to such extreme measures. Bahamut explained the presence of the powerful Shadowbinders, which helped them understand the reasons behind his actions. But Bahamut didn't halt his campaign. He continued to lead the forces to the remaining princedoms and cities that hadn't yet yielded. However, as he reached their gates, they were already wide open in surrender. The destruction and death they had witnessed at the hands of Bahamut had left them in dread and awe. They had even sent spies to witness the aftermath of the fortress attack and had quickly realized that resistance was futile. One by one, they knelt before the emperor and Bahamut, offering their surrender. Emperor's fame initially soared, but it was clear that the people now saw Bahamut as the true power behind the throne. He was not only the king of dragons but also the chancellor of the emperor, making him a figure of immense influence and authority. One by one, the remaining enemy forces knelt before the emperor and Bahamut, acknowledging their rule. Some even began to worship Bahamut as a being of destruction and war, recognizing the force that had united all of ET under a single ruler. This transformation had taken 9 years to achieve. Chapter 25. Over the course of 9 years, Bahamut's influence continued to grow, surpassing even that of the aging emperor who was slowly being consumed by a disease, cancer. The emperor's negligence of his duties had left the affairs of the realm largely in the hands of his subjects. While the emperor remained in power in name, the reality was quite different. Bahamut had become the true power behind the throne, and this knowledge had spread throughout the land, from peasants to high officials. With emperor's waning influence, people from all walks of life began to treat Bahamut with the utmost respect. His wisdom and power were no longer a secret and had become common knowledge. After the war, generals under the emperor's command frequently visited Bahamut, seeking his guidance and counsel. One particular general, Chang Jin, fell in love with Elia, which worried them as they feared Bahamut wouldn't approve. However, when they finally gathered the courage to approach Bahamut with their love, they were surprised when he not only agreed but also welcomed Chang Jin into their family. With this union, Aegon and Rhaenys gained a stepfather. From another perspective, it was beneficial as having a war-experienced general bound to Bahamut through marriage to Elia brought additional strength to their side. Over 9 years, Bahamut had trained young men to serve him, as people flocked to become part of the legendary Black Dragon's retinue. Even though they couldn't become soldiers, serving a legendary dragon was an honor in itself to them. At present, Bahamut had trained a force of around 12,000 men, ranging in age from 17 to 32. This number didn't include the men loyal to warlords who pledged their allegiance to Bahamut instead of the emperor, as they held a deep resentment for the current ruler. With these added allies, Bahamut commanded more than 35,000 strong men. During this time, there were numerous assassination attempts on Rhaenys, Aegon, and Elia, primarily driven by those who saw Bahamut placing great importance on them. Fortunately, none of these attempts succeeded as Bahamut had keen senses and sharp vision that covered a vast area. Those with nefarious intentions never managed to escape the fiery consequences, and curses directed at them proved futile. After these 9 years, Aegon had grown into a mature teenager at the age of 14. He displayed exceptional proficiency both in combat with a sword and in his studies, earning praise from scholars and martial masters alike. Aegon had even gathered his own group of followers, forming a personal retinue. Yet, what he coveted most was a single word of approval from Bahamut. Every time he accomplished something, he would eagerly approach Bahamut, seeking validation for his achievements. And every time, Bahamut didn't disappoint, offering words of praise and encouragement. Aegon had evolved into the ideal person who could potentially rule the 7 kingdoms wisely and justly. He consistently impressed Bahamut with his achievements, displaying all the qualities of a capable ruler. Bahamut even had Aegon attend council meetings of the realm, even though this was quite unconventional for a child of his age. This was an opportunity for him to learn and gather wisdom for his future role as a leader. However, Aegon wasn't exempt from Bahamut's discipline. The dragon would employ strict punishments if Aegon made mistakes, ensuring that he learned from his errors. But Aegon thrived under Bahamut's guidance, continuing to excel and prove himself as a future king. Rhaenys was a different story. As a woman, she might not possess the physical strength of men, but she more than made up for it with her agility, technique, and sword-wielding prowess. She had demonstrated her resilience by castrating men who approached her with ill intentions. Whenever she found herself in trouble, she would humbly approach Bahamut, seeking his support and protection. Rhaenys was known for her sharp tongue, a strong-willed nature that Bahamut admired in her. She was more determined to reclaim the 7 kingdoms, as she had endured humiliation as a young girl, barely escaping death with Bahamut's help. This experience had forged a special bond between her and Bahamut, whom she saw as a fatherly figure, perhaps even more so than the person her mother had married recently. The former young dragons had now grown into majestic adult dragons, surpassing 60 feet in size, which was considerably larger than Drogon from the series. Aegon was initially insistent on having Bahamut as his dragon partner, but Bahamut firmly rejected the idea, guiding Aegon to choose another dragon, Igneal, as the one best suited for a ruler. The four dragons had become imposing and more ferocious in appearance than Bahamut, despite his tremendous size. They were indeed a formidable sight. To Bahamut's delight, Moon had recently laid her first clutches of eggs. These eggs were all black, a striking contrast to her typical silver color. However, they had yet to hatch. Notice frowny face in a royal decree from the King of Dragons, Bahamut, the ever-greedy dragon roared, demanding, "Where are my precious power stones? And why, oh why, haven't you raided the Fanfic? Don't give me a reason to send my fiery companions after you. Leave a sparkling review and save yourself from, well, you know, more dragon-related drama." Chapter 26. As a dragon, Bahamut found himself in an unusual predicament. He was clueless about the intricacies of dragon mating, and much to his surprise, his former troublemaker, Daenerys, had somehow managed to seduce Moon. The sight of Daenerys displaying dominance over Moon, with flared wings and persistent growls, left Bahamut perplexed at first, and he chose to ignore it. It wasn't until Moon laid eggs that Bahamut finally realized what had transpired. Moon and Daenerys had mated. As a parent, Bahamut couldn't help but feel a strange pang of jealousy, an emotion he wasn't quite accustomed to. He contemplated the idea of mating with a female dragon to gain the experience, as he believed it was part of his dragon existence. The only potential female dragon he knew was Sapphire, but Bahamut hesitated because he viewed all his dragons as his own children. Then, a different idea sparked in his mind, visiting Valyria again. Perhaps there, he might find more dragons like himself, providing a solution to his newfound curiosity. Bahamut contemplated the idea of visiting Valyria, but the thought of leaving Elia and her children behind amidst the constant assassination attempts quickly quashed that plan. It was simply too risky. The pressing matter at hand was Rhaenys, who was now of marriageable age in this world's standards. Bahamut couldn't help but chuckle at the irony, he had made her too strong for her own good. Bahamut had a potential match in mind, the successor of the old general under the Emperor's command. He possessed a magnetic charisma and a promising future. Furthermore, his father's men were likely to remain loyal to him after his father's retirement. The challenge, however, was persuading Rhaenys to agree to the suggestion. As a colossal dragon, Bahamut couldn't resort to blackmail, saying, "Agree, or I'll burn you." She would likely burst into laughter if he tried that approach. Over time, Bahamut had grown surprisingly soft when it came to his beloved companions. But Bahamut was pleasantly surprised when Rhaenys didn't oppose his arrangement. Instead, she accepted it gracefully, reminding him that he had never asked her for anything before, so how could she possibly disagree with him? Her words filled Bahamut with a newfound sense of joy and energy. He swiftly summoned his servants to herald the old general and his only surviving son, Sun Tzu, for an audience. As they stood before Bahamut, he outlined his proposal. Both the old general and Sun Tzu were elated and readily agreed, their faces beaming with happiness. Sun Tzu, in particular, was thrilled with the match. Rhaenys was considered a rare beauty in Et, and her foreign allure had captivated the hearts of many high-class noblemen in Een City. During this time, Bahamut delved into Sun Tzu's memories to ensure that there were no hidden flaws or bad sides to his character. To his pleasant surprise, the old general had raised his child very well. The potential union seemed promising. The preparations for Rhaenys' marriage continued, and Bahamut was determined to move forward with the arrangement. However, Elia expressed her disagreement with Bahamut's decision, feeling that her opinion should have been considered before deciding on her daughter's marriage. But before her protests could escalate, Rhaenys herself silenced her mother. The wedding day arrived, and a grand and luxurious reception was held, far more elaborate than Elia's second marriage. The event drew a large crowd, and a magnificent golden podium was erected for Bahamut to watch Rhaenys' ceremony. Unexpectedly, the Emperor, who had remained secluded within the castle for a long time, emerged. In the past, the Emperor had asked Bahamut to marry Elia as his concubine, but Bahamut had disagreed, choosing instead to marry her and her daughter to those who served him. This refusal had stirred the Emperor's anger. Despite his old age and affliction with disease, he still lusted after women, especially when they were as special and rare as Elia and Rhaenys. This situation also made him ponder allowing Bahamut to leave Et, seeing Bahamut's disobedience as a challenge to his authority. Chapter 27. The Emperor appeared before Bahamut, who loomed over him like an elephant facing an ant. Without any greeting, the Emperor stated, "It's sad that you are leaving us so soon." Bahamut looked down at the aging emperor, who seemed much older than the last time they had met. In response, Bahamut reminded him, "We still have 3 more years of our agreement." The emperor, however, tried to convince Bahamut to leave sooner by offering compensation in gold. This display of desperation and weakness did not sit well with Bahamut. Growling, he warned, "Watch your words." The atmosphere at the event turned tense, with guards standing in defense of the emperor and the old general stepping forward to mediate. He attempted to explain the emperor's health issues but was interrupted by the emperor, who accused him of treachery and disrespect. Before the situation could escalate further, Bahamut unleashed a thunderous roar that silenced the entire gathering. He declared, "We are leaving, as you wish." With that, Bahamut took to the sky, unable to contain his anger any longer. If Bahamut had stayed any longer, his anger might have led to him burning the emperor and anyone who stood in his way, potentially ruining the entire situation. The emperor's disrespectful words visibly angered both Aegon and Rhaenys. They had never witnessed such insolence toward Bahamut and raised a substantial commotion, leading to the formation of 2 factions, the Emperor's faction and the Black Dragon faction. Before this internal conflict could escalate into a full-blown war, Bahamut announced his plan to leave ET. Aegon and Rhaenys questioned him about why he had let the Emperor's behavior go unchecked. Bahamut responded calmly, "It's time to return." His decision was final, and he had his reasons for not responding to the Emperor's provocation. Ravens were dispatched to various corners of ET to gather Bahamut's men, including his former allies and friends from the war. After a month, over 300,000 people had congregated in Een City, making Bahamut's departure a significant event for all of ET. Some of Bahamut's men chose to stay behind, as they had families and had grown deeply attached to their land. Others showed great interest in following Bahamut and remained steadfast in their loyalty to him. More than 10 great generals, including Elaya's husband and Rhaenys' husband's father, decided to follow Bahamut, as they refused to serve the hopeless emperor. That day, they swore their unconditional loyalty to Bahamut, even though he was a monstrous being. They anticipated another war as warlords themselves and were aware of Bahamut's choices for Rhaenys and Aegon. They understood that they were headed for a battle and wished to die on the battlefield with honor, as honor was more highly regarded than life in their culture. Over 20,000 large ships set sail from the Een port city. Before Bahamut's departure, the emperor sent 100 chests filled with gold, jewelry, and some Valyrian steel swords to Bahamut. Bahamut felt slighted by the message that accompanied this gift, "I don't owe you anything." Despite the insult, Bahamut endured. When all the ships had sailed far from the capital city, a massive shadow loomed above the emperor's palace one night. The emperor, along with his remaining pitiful generals and the former chancellor who had assumed the position after Bahamut's departure, were celebrating the dragon's absence, believing that they now had complete authority over the land. However, their jubilation was short-lived, as a torrent of black flames poured down upon the palace. The intense heat melted the entire castle, including the gold roof, engulfing the emperor and his followers in molten gold, along with the women who had served them. Chapter 28. After reducing the emperor's castle to ashes, Bahamut returned to the side of the ships in motion. He hadn't felt this good in a long time and had harbored the desire to burn down the emperor and his ostentatious castle, which is big as King's Landing. However, the presence of the stubborn emperor had kept him on track with his mission. He had somehow become entangled with the land of ET and grown attached to it. Now, his focus was on returning to Westeros. Based on his estimations, Daenerys must have been married to Khal Drogo by now, and Ned Stark likely still lived. However, reaching Westeros would take at least a year by ship. He couldn't employ the magic that had enabled him to move a few ships in the past, as a single mistake could lead to the death of his own people. So, he decided to continue on their journey. The only thing he could do was try to avoid unnecessary storms by using his magical abilities to manipulate the weather. As they approached Qarth, the people of the city dared not stop the ships for toll. They could see that these were formidable battleships, carrying armed men whose numbers could easily outnumber the entire forces of Qarth if needed. Then, a mighty roar echoed through the air, striking fear into the hearts of the people. Bahamut had used his magic to amplify his roar, making it much more powerful than his natural voice. The men aboard the ships began chanting, "For the Black Dragon, for the Black Dragon." Their voices filled the sea, creating a cacophony of sound. The ships easily sailed through the Strait of Qarth, and even a few trader ships managed to escape paying the toll by following Bahamut's forces. As 4 months passed, they drew nearer to Astapor. Since they had the extra gold that the emperor had given them, they decided to use it to purchase Unsullied from the good masters of Astapor. Their approach to the city caused panic among the good masters, as they feared an impending attack. The good masters hastily gathered all their Unsullied to defend their city. When the ships arrived, they sought to allay the good masters' fears, assuring them that they had not come to wage war. They requested permission to disembark, but they seemed taken aback when the immense shadows of Bahamut and his young dragons loomed over the city. Bahamut chose not to land and instead circled the city from the air, while his young dragons perched upon the city's walls, causing the Unsullied stationed there to step back in surprise, although they did not flee. At the same time, more ships approached the port of Astapor, carrying Aegon and Rhaenys, as well as Rhaenys' husband. Before departing from Bahamut had made sure that each of his men wore armor and helms bearing the emblem of the Targaryen house, signifying their allegiance. Both Aegon and Rhaenys disembarked from the ships, clad in black attire. They carried their Valyrian steel swords, which had been gifted to them by Bahamut. They were accompanied by the formidable men under Rhaenys' husband's command and the loyalists of Aegon. The group also had 50 chests filled with gold. Aegon stepped forward and addressed the good masters, saying, "I wish to purchase all of your trained and untrained men." Chapter 29. As time passed, preparations were underway to gather the men. Aegon and Rhaenys remained in Astapor, observing the suffering of the people. Their young hearts were deeply moved, and they struggled to convince themselves not to get involved. During their 9 years in they had learned magic under Bahamut's guidance, including the use of pyro-magic through the dragon as a conduit for gathering magical energy. Witnessing a man nailed to a cross, begging for release from his suffering, Rhaenys summoned a flame to end his torment. The slaves stared in astonishment, perceiving her as if she were a sorceress. In that moment, Bahamut's voice echoed in their minds, asking, "Do you wish to burn down Astapor and free the slaves?" Both Aegon and Rhaenys answered simultaneously, "I do." Bahamut then instructed them, "Then do as I say." Following Bahamut's guidance, Aegon approached the good masters with a request for both trained and untrained men. Initially, the masters were hesitant to comply with the latter part of the request. However, when Rhaenys mentioned that there was a dragon among them that could be ridden by anyone, they grew intrigued, seeking proof of her claim. In response to the good master's demand for proof, Rhaenys agreed and told them to gather all the men, assuring them she would fulfill her part of the bargain. A total of 8,500 Unsullied assembled in an open area, a number greater than when Daenerys acquired them. Bahamut made a dramatic appearance, stunning all those present, including the highly trained Unsullied. Bahamut descended near a structure, nearly demolishing it with his immense presence. The aura surrounding Bahamut overwhelmed even the seasoned warriors. Lying down, Bahamut indicated his willingness for the good masters to mount him. Initially, they found it hard to believe, but their insatiable greed for a dragon like Bahamut led them to set aside their doubts. They readily agreed to Rhaenys' requests, including the sale of a translator, as Bahamut had asked to do. When the good masters handed over a harpy's whip to Rhaenys, both she and Aegon couldn't conceal their smiles. Rhaenys then ordered the Unsullied to assemble and commanded them to forward march. As they approached her, she called for a halt. As the good masters attempted to climb onto Bahamut, he suddenly rose, causing them to stumble backward. Perplexed, one of the good masters asked what Bahamut was doing to Rhaenys and Aegon, to which Bahamut himself responded, "We dragons are not slaves, you pathetic humans." Bahamut's words struck fear into the hearts of the good masters, who had disregarded the potential consequences of their greed. Before they could flee, Bahamut unleashed his fiery breath, incinerating them. Rhaenys then instructed the Unsullied, saying, "Unsullied, slay the masters, slay those who hold the whip, slay those who wield swords against us, but spare the children and free the slaves from their chains." One by one, the Unsullied embarked on a ruthless killing spree against those who were stunned by the dragon's wrath. The dragons joined in, setting fire to the structures while avoiding harming the children and those in chains who had gathered around Bahamut, following his instructions. Chapter 30. Astapor lay in ruins, reduced to ashes by the mighty flames of the dragons. As the freed slaves made their way back to their homes, Bahamut requested that the orphan children be taken under their care. Outside the remnants of Astapor, the Unsullied gathered, their faces marked by a newfound sense of freedom. Rhaenys stood amidst them, addressing the warriors, "Unsullied. You have been slaves all your lives. Today, I give you freedom. Any man who wishes to leave may do so, and no one will harm him. I give you my word." A solemn hush followed her words, with not a single Unsullied choosing to depart. "Or will you fight for me? As free men?" Rhaenys inquired, her voice carrying a mix of determination and hope. In response, the Unsullied struck their spears against the ground in perfect unison, a resounding declaration of their unwavering commitment to fight for her as free individuals. They didn't see it as servitude, but as an allegiance to a leader they believed in. With this, Rhaenys now possessed her own formidable army, independent of her brother or her husband. Bahamut and his forces departed from the smoldering ruins of Astapor, leaving the city in desolation. Some of the generals expressed their discontent about not being allowed to participate in the violent chaos, but Aegon assured them that a greater purpose awaited them. Bahamut, considering the idea of finding Daenerys, realized it wouldn't be an easy task. Instead, he pressed on towards Dragonstone. In Westeros, Robert had met a fate similar to his previous one, perishing in a hunting accident. This time, however, he hadn't harbored the same delusions of challenging the Targaryens with dragons. In this world, Ned Stark still stood as the hand of the king, overseeing the Seven Kingdoms. During the 4-month journey to Dragonstone, Rhaenys took the time to understand the Unsullied better. She instituted a daily custom of giving the Unsullied new names. Many of those born free chose to reclaim their original names, if they remembered them, while others selected names from heroes, gods, or even items like weapons, gems, and flowers. This led to some rather unusual names among the soldiers. Grey Worm, who had been much younger when he met Daenerys, decided to retain his name, explaining, "It is a lucky name. The name this one was born to was accursed. That was the name he had when he was taken for a slave. But Grey Worm is the name this one drew the day Rhaenys Targaryen set him free." Rhaenys, moved by Grey Worm's words, responded, "But still, it's a name given to a slave. My men are free, and he is no longer a slave. He is no longer bear the name of slave." On that day, Rhaenys herself gave him the name Ragnar. As Dragonstone and its castle finally came into view after their long journey, Rhaenys felt her blood stir with excitement. However, Aegon had a different reaction, commenting, "Never thought this place would look like shit," making Rhaenys slap Aegon's head. If Bahamut had heard his words, he might have had a good laugh. After all, as a person who had spent his life in ET and lacked any sentimental attachment to his birthplace, anyone who didn't find their homeland to their liking would likely share Aegon's sentiment. Chapter 31. During this time, Stannis Baratheon held Dragonstone as its lord, but he was unaware of the imminent threat posed by more than 20,000 battleships approaching the island. The patrol ships sent to warn Stannis were abruptly silenced by Bahamut's magic, leaving the Lord unaware of the approaching danger. The sun had not yet risen, but Bahamut was guiding the ships, eliminating the need to stop and determine the direction of their journey by the rising sun. When the guards on Dragonstone's walls became alarmed by the presence of the approaching fleet, they quickly informed Stannis, alerting him to the dire situation. Stannis realized that with the sheer number of enemy ships and the sigils they carried, they were not there as allies. In a desperate attempt to save his daughter and wife, Stannis decided to escape on a ship headed to Storm's End while preparing to defend Dragonstone against the incoming threat. But time was running out. As Stannis prepared to send his daughter Shireen and his wife Celis away on a ship, a massive shadow suddenly loomed in the sky above their vessel, causing panic among everyone on board. When Bahamut spotted Stannis in the ship below him, he couldn't help but think, "We meet again." Stannis, who had experienced the dread of encountering this dragon before, looked up with fear in his eyes and clutched his daughter and wife as if preparing to embrace death. Davos joined them, gripping Shireen's hand while inwardly feeling relieved that at least his son had escaped this dire situation. With an affectionate gaze, he looked at Shireen, who was lost in thought as she stared up at the dragon watching them. Then, he exchanged a grateful look with Stannis before their attention returned to the dragon above. However, the situation took an unexpected turn when Bahamut's forces surrounded their ship, and his soldiers began boarding. To everyone's shock, Bahamut's voice resonated loudly, "Keep them alive." This command halted the ET warriors' killing spree as they attempted to capture everyone on the ship alive. Stannis couldn't believe his eyes, he had never imagined that the dragon he once encountered could speak. After giving this order, Bahamut flew away, heading toward the castle. As the chaos unfolded on the ship, Aegon and Rhaenys, along with their dragons Igneel and Moon, easily captured Dragonstone. Those who stood in their way were swiftly consumed by dragon fire without any hesitation. Meanwhile, Bahamut landed in a mountainous area near Dragonstone Castle, and Aegon took his place in the ancestral seat of House Targaryen. Everyone in the hall immediately knelt before him, recognizing his authority. Bahamut, with his immense presence, spread his wings and let out a mighty roar to assert his dominance. The other 4 young dragons paid their respects by bowing in front of Bahamut. The Targaryen legacy was re-established in Dragonstone Chapter 32. Aegon, Rhaenys, and the group of generals, including Aegon's stepfather and Rhaenys' father-in-law, ascended the mountain to meet with Bahamut. Elia had also joined them, an unusual move for her, given her avoidance of matters related to war. Bahamut sensed their approach and prepared to meet them, ensuring he was in a clean and presentable state. Upon their arrival, the generals bowed before Bahamut, keeping a respectful distance. Aegon asked Bahamut, "What should be our next move?" Bahamut, gazing at them, replied, "We must press on." Rhaenys hesitated before adding, "But our soldiers are exhausted from the long journey." Bahamut responded firmly, "We can't afford to wait. We must strike our enemies while they are unprepared. All our efforts to keep about our presence in Dragonstone until now will be in vain otherwise." No one voiced any disagreement. Bahamut continued, "Our next target is King's Landing, and we must take it before nightfall." A general inquired about the plan, and Bahamut explained, "I will destroy the walls and archers on the wall. 1/4 of our ships will remain at sea to prevent any escape by sea. Half of our forces will advance through the city toward the Red Keep. Another 1/4 will enter the Red Keep through a secret passage I know of. The other 4 dragons will guard the city gates to prevent any escape by land." Bahamut had intimate knowledge of King's Landing, having visited it to rescue Elia and her children. While searching for them, he had discovered the secret passage into the Red Keep. He then instructed them, "Send the best men we have to use the secret passage to capture the Red Keep. Elia's husband is the best choice to lead this operation." Bahamut shared his memories of the Red Keep's layout with him. Before the afternoon, the fleet once again set sail towards King's Landing, ready to execute their daring plan. As the sun dipped low in the sky, Lord Eddard Stark stood on the High Septon's pulpit outside the doors of the Sept, weakened and supported by 2 gold cloaks. But he looked thinner and more frail than Arya had ever seen him. It was as if he was being held upright rather than standing, his broken leg encased in a grey, decaying cast. Behind him, the High Septon, a squat, elderly man with an imposing crown of gold and crystal, stood in his white robes. A hush fell over the plaza as knights and high lords gathered, with Joffrey and his mother in prominent positions. Arya spotted the Hound, resplendent in white, with the king's guard around him. Varys, the eunuch, glided among the lords, and a short man with a silvery cape and pointed beard caught her attention. She thought he might be the one who had once fought a duel for her mother. And there, in the midst of it all, stood Sansa, radiant in sky-blue silk, auburn hair beautifully styled, and silver bracelets adorning her wrists. Arya scowled, puzzled by her sister's apparent happiness. A line of gold-cloaked spearmen kept the crowd at bay, led by a stout man in elaborate black and gold armor. The metallic shimmer of his cloak spoke of true cloth of gold. When the tolling bell finally ceased, a solemn quiet descended over the plaza. Her father lifted his head and began to speak, his voice feeble and strained. People behind Arya shouted, asking him to speak louder. The man in black and gold armor prodded father sharply, and Arya wanted to shout for them to leave him be, but she knew no one would listen. She bit her lip. Father raised his voice, "I am Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell and Hand of the King," he declared, his voice now carrying across the plaza. "I come before you to confess my treason in the sight of gods and men." "No," Arya whimpered, watching in anguish. Below her, the crowd erupted into a frenzy. Taunts and obscenities filled the air. Sansa had buried her face in her hands. Father strained to be heard above the uproar. "I betrayed the faith of my king and the trust of my friend, Robert," he shouted. "I swore to defend and protect his children, yet before his blood was cold, I plotted to depose and murder his son and seize the throne for myself. Let the High Septon and Baelor the Beloved and the Seven bear witness to the truth of what I say. Joffrey Baratheon is the one true heir to the Iron Throne, and by the grace of all the gods, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and protector of the realm." Arya gasped as she saw a stone sail through the air and strike her father. The gold cloaks kept him from falling, but blood streamed from a deep gash on his forehead. More stones followed, one hitting the guard to father's left and another clanging off the knight's breastplate in black and gold armor. Two of the king's guard stepped forward to shield Joffrey and the queen. Arya's hand slipped beneath her cloak, finding needle in its sheath. She gripped it tightly, praying fervently, "Please, gods, keep him safe. Don't let them hurt my father." The High Septon knelt before Joffrey and his mother, intoning, "As we sin, so do we suffer." His voice resonated with a deep, swelling resonance that drowned out fathers. "This man has confessed his crimes in the sight of gods and men, here in this holy place." Rainbows danced around his head as he raised his hands in entreaty. "The gods are just, yet blessed Baelor taught us that they are also merciful. What shall be done with this traitor, your grace?" Amidst the thousand voices screaming, Arya was deaf to them all. Prince Joffrey, no, King Joffrey, emerged from behind the shields of his king's guard. "My mother bids me let Lord Eddard take the black, and Lady Sansa has begged mercy for her father." He turned to look at Sansa, smiling, and for a fleeting moment, Arya thought the gods had answered her prayer. But then Joffrey turned back to the crowd and declared, "But they have the soft hearts of women. So long as I am your king, treason shall never go unpunished. Ser Island, bring me his head." The crowd roared, and Arya felt the statue of Baelor sway as they surged against it. The High Septon clung to the king's cape, and Varys came rushing over, waving his arms. Even the queen seemed to be saying something to him, but Joffrey shook his head. Lords and knights moved aside as he stepped through, tall and emaciated, a skeleton encased in iron mail, the king's justice. Arya heard her sisters scream dimly. Sansa had fallen to her knees, sobbing hysterically. Ser Island Payne ascended the pulpit steps. Arya squirmed between the feet of Baelor's statue and flung herself into the crowd. But then a tremendous roar echoed through the city, and the entire city fell into silence. Suddenly, the alarm bells rang, signaling an enemy attack. The Targaryens had returned. Chapter 33. Bahamut advanced toward the walls of King's Landing, and with a mighty blast, he shattered the Iron Gate, the closest entrance from Blackwater Bay. A hail of arrows rained down upon Bahamut, but he used a powerful wind shield to protect himself. He continued moving, systematically destroying every gate that could serve as an escape route for the enemy, turning them into debris to block any potential retreat. Meanwhile, more than 30,000 of Bahamut's men rushed toward the Iron Gate by boat, using the shore deposits made by Bahamut's forces. On another front, Rhaenys' husband led the Unsullied and his troops into the Red Keep using a secret passage that had been constructed during Maegar's reign. As Bahamut dealt with the archers and guards on the walls, he strolled around King's Landing, with the young dragons creating a fiery barrier outside the city to prevent anyone from escaping by climbing over the debris. The siege of King's Landing had begun. The warriors of ET clashed with anyone who raised a sword against them as they stormed through King's Landing. Their extensive training and experience in a land plagued by constant warfare made them formidable killing machines. They were relentless in their pursuit, and anyone who crossed their path met a swift and deadly end. Before the assault on King's Landing, Bahamut had given a strict order to his forces: spare civilians and those who knelt and laid down their weapons. His men followed his commands faithfully. Even if they accidentally bumped into someone, they would help them to their feet and quietly instruct them to find safety in their native language, demonstrating their unwavering commitment to Bahamut's instructions and their training. Inside the city, King Joffrey and his Kingsguard retreated to the Red Keep, realizing they could not escape through the city gates. Queen Regent Cersei, desperate to find her children and perhaps even contemplating ending their lives before capture, was in a state of utter despair. However, their escape plan was foiled by Bahamut's men who had infiltrated the Red Keep using a secret passage. Because of that, Red Keep itself had turned into a battleground, with the Gold Cloaks desperately trying to fend off the relentless assault of the warriors from ET and the Unsullied. However, their sheer numbers overwhelmed the city's defenders. More than 12,000 men who had used the secret passage infiltrated the Red Keep, leaving the Gold Cloaks in a dire situation. Many of them attempted to flee but were hunted down by the warriors emerging from the city and converging on the Red Keep. The Red Keep was transformed into a war zone, with every corner under siege by Bahamut's men. Eventually, they reached the throne room, where King Joffrey, Queen Regent Cersei, and her children were guarded by the King's Guard. The King's Guard, especially the Mountain and the Hound, did their best to protect the royal family. The Mountain, despite his injuries, easily crushed many attackers, and the Hound proved to be a formidable adversary. However, their defense didn't last long. Old General and Scarlet General, experienced veterans and incredibly strong warriors, stepped forward to face the Mountain and the Hound. The old general was as massive as the Mountain himself. In a fierce clash, the old general's heavy halberd met the Mountain's sword, but with a swift and powerful maneuver, the halberd sliced through the Mountain's neck, defeating the seemingly invulnerable knight. Meanwhile, the Scarlet General overpowered the Hound with his own Valyrian steel longsword, ending their resistance in the throne room. Cersei, feeling cornered and desperate, approached the approaching warriors and implied that she might commit suicide if they got any closer with a knife in her hand while keeping her other children in her back. At the same time, Joffrey, with his sword raised, pointed it at the approaching warriors, repeating, "I'm the king, don't come closer to me, no, no." However, one of the ET warriors couldn't tolerate Joffrey's screaming any longer and swiftly broke Joffrey's nose, causing him to bleed. Cersei, distracted by Joffrey's injury, let her guard down. This momentary lapse in her attention allowed the Unsullied to move in and restrain Cersei. Along with her other children, they were all captured by Bahamut's men. Chapter 34. Rhaenys, eager for battle, couldn't resist the urge to participate in the attack on King's Landing, despite her husband and Bahamut's orders to stay back. She sneaked out disguised as an Unsullied, determined to be on the front lines. Trained as a skilled warrior, she was more than ready for action. As Bahamut's army stormed the city, Rhaenys was right there with them. Even Old General, who led one of the forces, didn't realize that Rhaenys was among the Unsullied. Rhaenys proved to be a formidable presence on the battlefield, and anyone who crossed swords with her ended up worse for wear. The Unsullied had her back as she fought alongside them. Meanwhile, Eddard Stark and his daughter Arya were trying to escape towards the Gate of the Gods. Unbeknownst to them, the gates were guarded by dragons, and their journey to safety was fraught with danger. Arya helped her father, whose leg was crippled, as they made their way through the chaotic city. In the midst of this turmoil, Sansa, who had been escorted with King Joffrey, got separated from her entourage when ET warriors attacked. She was eventually captured by Bahamut's forces, who believed she held some significant position among the enemy. Eddard Stark was unaware of his daughter's capture, as he believed she had escaped the city along with King Joffrey, who was also captured by Bahamut's forces. Unbeknownst to them all, their paths were about to cross in unexpected ways. Rhaenys and her Unsullied made their way through the streets of King's Landing, causing the residents to hide in their homes, fearing they might be harmed. The city, in stark contrast to ET, was a grim and chaotic place, and the smell was unpleasant. Rhaenys observed the suffering and poverty around her, homeless individuals, and orphaned children running and hiding from her presence. But then, she noticed a man supported by a girl who was barely half his size. The wolf sigil on their clothing caught her attention, and she ordered the Unsullied to capture them. Arya was the first to react, drawing her needle with fear in her eyes. However, Eddard Stark stopped her and gently laid down her weapon. Rhaenys approached Eddard Stark coldly and demanded to know their identities. When Eddard remained silent, Rhaenys struck him with her fist, causing him to fall. Arya tried to defend her father, but Rhaenys easily kicked her away. Eddard, struggling, finally spoke his name, Eddard Stark. Before he could say more, Rhaenys unleashed her anger, hitting him repeatedly. Eddard felt himself losing consciousness under the relentless assault. Rhaenys then stood up and expressed her disgust, warning Eddard of the consequences of his actions as a traitor. She identified herself as Princess Rhaenys Targaryen and ordered her men to capture them and bring them when summoned. As Rhaenys continued her journey toward the Red Keep, Eddard Stark, bruised and shaken, realized that the woman who resembled a Dornish was none other than Princess Rhaenys Targaryen. He turned to look at Arya, who had also suffered the brunt of Rhaenys' fury. In the midst of the chaos, Bahamut found a spot near Maegor Holdfast where he could rest. The dragon, majestic and colossal, settled down, waiting patiently for the turmoil to subside. Meanwhile, Aegon made his way towards the throne room, his heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and solemnity. He gazed at the formidable Iron Throne, a symbol of both his ancestry's pride and his father's yearning. After a moment's pause, he ascended the steps and took his place upon the jagged seat. From this commanding position, Aegon surveyed the room, his eyes meeting those of the deposed King Joffrey and his mother Cersei, who seethed with a potent blend of anger and sorrow. In a voice tinged with icy resolve, Aegon spoke, "I won't be the one to pass judgment upon you." Chapter 35. As Bahamut rested within the confines near Maegor's Holdfast, his devoted ET warriors formed a protective circle around him. they were resolute in ensuring no one would dare to disrupt the Lord's slumber like they did in E.T. The rest of Bahamut's forces took strategic positions, fortifying the walls and the castle, effectively turning it into an impregnable stronghold. Nearby, the other dragons, weary from their continuous efforts to create fiery barriers at every gate, landed beside Bahamut to find some well-deserved rest. They shared in the collective vigilance over their resting dad. After a while, Aegon, flanked by the apprehensive prisoners, approached where Bahamut rested. The formidable presence of the dragons was enough to send shivers down the spines of the captives. Fear gnawed at them, imagining a fiery end. As Aegon reached the resting Bahamut, he bowed reverently and began, "Lord Bahamut, I, a young ruler, am not fit to pass judgment upon my enemies. I beseech you, as a figure of guidance and authority, to pass judgment on my behalf." At Aegon's request, Bahamut raised his head, a silent acknowledgement of his willingness to pronounce judgment. As the prisoners were brought forward, Joffrey, the former king, found himself trembling in terror. His struggles to escape only intensified as he was brought closer to the immense dragon, Bahamut. His fear was palpable, and he couldn't fathom that the colossal creature was now speaking. Bahamut's voice resonated with authority as he commanded, "Bring his mother and other siblings." The prisoners, still stunned by the fact that the dragon was conversing, struggled to comprehend what was happening. At first they doubt the sanity of Aegon, who had requested Bahamut to pass judgment. Soldiers obeyed the order and brought Cersei Lannister, the Queen Regent, and her other children, Myrcella and Tommen. Cersei clutched her children tightly, her head lowered, biting her lips, as they were all led before the formidable dragon. Myrcella and Tommen were overwhelmed by fear, their cries echoing their terror. Bahamut's orders continued as he commanded, "Bring the small council members as well." As the small council members were brought forward, Cersei Lannister's terror of the speaking dragon, Bahamut, only grew. Soldiers dragged in Grand Maester Pycelle, Lord Peter Baelish, Varys, and Lord Stannis Baratheon. The only one missing was Lord Renly Baratheon. Cersei's heart raced, fearing what might transpire. Then, Bahamut commanded, "Where is the hand of the king?" The soldiers, responding to a faint voice, shifted, revealing Eddard Stark, frail and struggling to move. He was helped to stand beside the other council members. Eddard looked at Bahamut, astonishment in his eyes. The dragon's intelligence and ability to speak were beyond anything he had imagined. Bahamut turned his gaze to Cersei, the former queen, and asked, "Cersei Lannister, is your son the true heir to Robert Baratheon?" Cersei, summoning what courage she could, lied through her teeth, "Yes." But Bahamut pressed on, warning her of the grave consequences if she was deceitful. Then, Bahamut turned to Grand Maester Pycelle, who was muttering to himself in distress. The dragon's question cut through his delusions, "Is Joffrey the rightful heir to Robert Baratheon?" Maester Pycelle, gripped by fear, suddenly looked up and stammered, "No. He is not." Bahamut continued his relentless inquiry, "Then the former king is unworthy of the crown and is a bastard?" Pycelle hesitated before confirming, "Yes." Turning his piercing gaze back to Cersei, Bahamut asked the question that would shatter her carefully guarded secret, "Then who is his true father?" Joffrey, his mouth forcibly covered by soldiers, seethed in anger because of humiliation he is suffering. Cersei, unable to speak, locked eyes with Bahamut, her face a mask of disbelief. Cersei remained silent as Bahamut accused, "Jaime Lannister." Bahamut then directed his attention to Eddard Stark, asking, "Am I correct?" Eddard was left stunned and speechless. Cersei couldn't comprehend how this colossal beast before her knew of her one of the darkest secret. Chapter 36. Cersei, fearing for her children's safety, reluctantly agreed, "Yes, he is their father." Her concern for her children still held a place in her heart, preventing her from outright denying the truth. Bahamut then turned his attention to Joffrey, the young king who had an unbelieving expression on his face as he stared at his mother. Bahamut pondered, "I don't know what to call you since you were not born in the Western lands. I can't address you as Joffrey Hill." Then he declared, "Joffrey the unworthy and bastard, I hereby sentence you to death." Joffrey, in a last-ditch attempt, wanted to plea, "Don't kill me," but his mouth was held stuffed. As Bahamut gathered flames in his mouth, the onlookers, including the council members, recoiled in terror. Cersei fell back and crawled backward with her children by her side, watching in horror as Joffrey screamed and burned. In the end, Joffrey fell to the ground, his struggle extinguished. As the horrifying reality unfolded, the prisoners braced themselves for the fiery fate that awaited them, expecting to be burned to death by the fearsome beast. Daenerys, the dragon who had a sense of the burnt flesh, cautiously approached Joffrey's lifeless body and turned his gaze towards Bahamut, as the air filled with tension. The prisoner shuddered, anticipating the worst. Bahamut, letting out a low growl, made it clear that Daenerys should step back, which the dragon promptly obeyed. The prisoners, frightened and anxious, could only guess at what would happen next. Bahamut then shifted his attention to Cersei, who was clutching her head with both hands, her tear-filled eyes fixed on Joffrey's charred remains. In a solemn tone, Bahamut announced, her judgment will be passed along with her father's, and the soldiers promptly escorted her, along with her children, to the prison, where they awaited their fate. As they departed, Bahamut turned his attention to Maester Pycelle and expressed his gratitude, saying, "Thank you for your cooperation, Maester Pycelle." Fearing for his life, Maester Pycelle stammered, "It's my duty to answer rightfully, my lord." Bahamut then asked, "As a traitor, what should I do with you, Maester Pycelle?" The maester was struck with terror and drenched in sweat as he gazed at Bahamut, his future uncertain. Bahamut continued, "I don't care about what you did during the rebels' reign, but one of the main reasons behind the fall of the Targaryens and the cause of the war is you, High Septon, and your citadel." Aegon, Rhaenys, and Elia leaned in, eager to hear what Bahamut had to say, as it was apparent he had something significant to reveal. Bahamut continued, "You and the citadel conspired to hide the truth about Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen." Eddard Stark's interest was piqued. Bahamut went on, "The realm believed that Prince Rhaegar had allegedly abducted Lyanna Stark, but in truth, Lyanna had not been kidnapped, she had eloped with Rhaegar, who had the High Septon issue an annulment to his marriage with Elia. The Citadel and the High Septon were aware of this truth, yet they intentionally withheld this information, including you, Maester Pycelle." Maester Pycelle, fearful of his impending fate, attempted to deny the accusations, saying, "No, my lord, no, my lord." But Bahamut's judgment was clear. He declared, "You betrayed your lord and your realm, causing war and the death of many. So mere flames are not punishment enough for traitors like you. Take him and geld him, but staunch the wound. I want his manhood fried up and fed to him. Do not let him die until he has eaten every bite. When he wishes for death, then burn him." Soldiers approached and forcibly removed Maester Pycelle, who pleaded for mercy. Elia struggled to hold back her tears as she learned more of her husband's betrayal and the annulment of their marriage. Rhaenys did her best to comfort Elia during this distressing revelation. Chapter 37. Bahamut shifted his attention to Master of Coin, Lord Peter Baelish, known as Littlefinger. Littlefinger could feel the weight of Bahamut's gaze on him and realized that the dragon was aware of his presence. Bahamut's words cut through the silence, "Chaos is a ladder, am I right, Master of Coin, Lord Peter Baelish?" Peter Baelish raised his head with visible struggle, attempting to maintain a stoic expression, even though he was inwardly terrified by the dragon's presence and its uncanny ability to uncover the deepest secrets of those it judged. He felt as though he stood before one of the most dangerous beings in existence. Littlefinger had always thrived on keeping his enemies confused. His motto was to keep them uncertain about his true intentions and actions, making it difficult for them to predict his next move. This strategy had served him well in his political games. However, the dragon before him seemed to possess a level of knowledge that could unravel all his schemes. With just his first sentence, Bahamut had shattered the illusion of Littlefinger's secrecy and left him with a deep sense of vulnerability. Lord Peter Baelish, trembling with barely contained fear, attempted to feign confusion. "Lord, I'm a bit confused," he stammered, trying to buy time. Bahamut's words had left him feeling vulnerable and exposed. The dragon's gaze bore into him, unrelenting. "What game are you playing right now, Lord Peter Baelish?" Bahamut asked, his voice like a relentless storm. Littlefinger was certain he was facing a formidable adversary, one who saw through his carefully constructed facade. Littlefinger attempted to regain his composure. "Lord, I understand your skepticism," he began, his voice quivering. "But I've always been a man of pragmatism. In this intricate game of politics, I've done what I deemed necessary to serve the realm's interests, even if it meant making difficult choices." Bahamut's eyes remained fixed on him as he continued to press. "Difficult choices, you say?" the dragon inquired. "The one who murdered the former hand of the king or the usurper using poison from Lys? What is it called, Tears of Lys? Then you made a troubled woman, Lisa, send a letter to Lady Catelyn, telling her it was the Lannisters who murdered Jon Arryn. You even sent assassins to kill Lord Eddard Stark's second youngest child and provided the knife for the assassination. Later, when it failed, you claimed the knife belonged to Tyrion Lannister. And now, you conspired with Cersei Lannister against Eddard Stark, betraying and accusing him. Nearly caused war between Stark and Lannister, am I wrong? Lord Peter Baelish swiftly denied, "No, my lord, I deny it." Bahamut then turned his attention to Eddard Stark and questioned, "What was the last thing Peter Baelish said to you?" Eddard was shaken from his thoughts, realizing that his enemy had always been much closer than he had ever suspected. But before Eddard could respond, Bahamut added, "I did warn you not to trust me." Eddard was stunned once more, unable to fathom the extent of Littlefinger's deceit. Bahamut continued, "For a man of small stature, you have great ambition. How does it feel to imagine yourself sitting on the Iron Throne?" Peter Baelish's eyes widened with disbelief. Bahamut's words had unraveled his web of deceit. The dragon's final decree was clear. Your punishment will come from the north. Until then, ponder the worst possibilities. Guards swiftly moved to take Littlefinger away to his prison, ensuring there would be no escape for the master manipulator. Notice frowny face. Hear ye, from the most magnificent, grandiose Dragon King, ruler of all scales and roars, and his fabulous elder and younger dragons. We find ourselves in quite the pickle, thanks to a pesky human named Baelish, who's turned our treasure hoard into a treasureless bore. Oh, the scales on my back are shivering in anger. But fear not, for I have a plan, dear dragons. We shall reclaim our kingdom's glory, and to do so, we need to raid our mountain of gold for some power stones. These aren't for display, they're for our financial dismay. So, young and elder dragons, would you be so kind as to lend a claw or two? Now, about that sneaky spider, Varys, what should I do with him? Chapter 38. Varys, the master of whisperers, was pushed forward by the soldiers and stood before Bahamut. The dragon had expected Varys to be a man unafraid of death, but he didn't anticipate the spy master to face him so resolutely. Varys, it seemed, had no fear of the dragon, a creature born of magic. Bahamut began by recounting Varys's history. Born a slave and made part of a traveling group of actors that performed in various parts of Essos. In your early adolescence, as the group traveled through Myr, your master sold you to a sorcerer. This sorcerer gave you a potion that temporarily paralyzed you, followed by the gruesome castration. Your severed genitals were thrown into a fire, which turned blue, and you heard a voice answer the sorcerer's call. Why would this sorcerer pay a huge sum of gold when he could have bought dozens of kids your age? The only plausible answer is your bloodline. Are you descended from the female line of the Blackfyres? Varys, visibly sweating but resolute, finally spoke after a long silence. I am. His answer sent shockwaves through the crowd in the yard, and even Rhaena and Aegon were taken aback. They had heard of the Blackfyre rebellion from their mother. Seeing his guess gone right, Bahamut continued to question Varys, "You are not loyal to the Targaryens or any ruler who sits on the Iron Throne. Yet, you claim to serve the realm. What do you mean by serving the realm when you hold no loyalty to the protector of the realm?" Varys responded calmly, "Lord, all I wish to do is restore peace and prosperity. I believe that serving the realm means ensuring the well-being of its people." Bahamut, however, was not easily convinced. He delved into Varys's past, recounting the spymaster's life from his early days as a beggar to his rise as a master of espionage. For a person who was cast aside and left to die by a sorcerer, you showed great resilience. You resorted to begging, prostitution, and thievery, becoming one of the best thieves the known world had ever seen. It was only later that you realized the value of information and began training your own spy network. You even became the spymaster for King Aerys. I find it hard to believe that someone with your background suddenly wishes to serve the realm out of the goodness of their heart. What is the one thing missing in this puzzle? What have you heard in the flames? Varys remained silent, visibly shaken by Bahamut's words. He struggled to maintain his composure, feeling the weight of the dragon's intense scrutiny. Chapter 39, edited. Varys could no longer conceal his terrified expression. The weight of Bahamut's words hung heavily in the air. Bahamut continued to press him, his voice unyielding. You must have learned something terrible, something that haunts your nightmares because of what you heard in those flames. It could be the very reason you've dedicated your life to gathering information and serving the realm here in Westeros. It's as if you're a stranger in a foreign land, driven by an unspoken purpose. Varys couldn't hold Bahamut's piercing gaze any longer. The dragon's words struck fear deep into his heart. He knew that he might be a pawn in a grander scheme, manipulated by forces far beyond his comprehension, possibly tied to some malevolent god or an entity like the Lord of Light or even Blue Draven from the past. Bahamut, however, wasn't entirely sure himself. He lacked the power to see the future or past clearly, and he dared not tamper with magic that might lead to his own demise. Instead, he decided to reveal his own unique existence. But nothing of what you heard in those flames will come to pass, Bahamut stated. Because I am a variable. A force that defies prediction. I have already altered the course of the future and the past, and I will continue to do so. The crowd listened in awe, unable to fully grasp the magnitude of Bahamut's words, what he meant. Already the existence of Bahamut is enough to scare them to core. He continued, I am a dragon, worshipped as the embodiment of magic. I was supposed to be dead, but I live, more powerful than ever. Varys found it hard to believe, his thoughts jumbled as he tried to reconcile Bahamut's words with the cryptic message he had heard in the flames. As Bahamut's voice resonated, the atmosphere darkened, and the sky thundered with lightning. A sense of impending change swept through the onlookers. Bahamut's eyes glowed, his very presence radiating power. I won't rest until this realm finds true peace, Bahamut declared. He roared with a mighty, echoing sound, shaking the ground beneath him. Other dragons joined in, their roars reverberating in unison, echoing Bahamut's proclamation. Bahamut's words and roars carried far and wide, reaching every corner of King's Landing. Soldiers who had followed Bahamut, including those who guarded the walls and the castle, began to chant in unison, their voices ringing through the city, for the Black Dragon. For the Black Dragon. Even Cersei, shaken from her traumatic ordeal, couldn't help but be awakened by the cacophony. In the prison, Davos and Stannis' daughter peered through the bars, their eyes drawn to the electrifying scene unfolding outside. The people of King's Landing were witnessing the birth of a legend, a force that could shape the destiny of the realm. Bahamut rose from his resting position, commanding a hushed awe from the onlookers. Even Varys, who prided himself on being unflappable, couldn't help but take a step back. The cheers for Bahamut echoed both inside and outside the walls of King's Landing. The ground seemed to tremble with the power of the moment, culminating in a resounding roar from Bahamut that seemed to shake the very foundations of the city. When the tumultuous applause finally quieted, Bahamut turned his gaze towards Varys, and the air seemed to grow heavier with anticipation. In a voice that carried the weight of authority, he spoke, Varys Blackfire, a descendant of dragon. By my decree, Bahamut Draconis Rixarian, you are hereby granted a pardon, absolving you of all charges and crimes brought against you. Varys didn't hesitate. He immediately knelt before Bahamut, a surge of emotion welling up inside him. Despite his reservations about serving a lord and his distaste for anything related to magic, the revelation he had just experienced left him eager to serve Bahamut. Lord, Varys began, his voice steady but brimming with sincerity, I am ready and willing to serve you with all my heart. He couldn't bring himself to meet Bahamut's gaze, his heart pounding in his chest. But then Bahamut's words came, a profound acceptance that left Varys breathless. I grant you the privilege of becoming one of my own. This meant he was serving Bahamut directly, not merely Aegon. But for Aegon, who had always admired Bahamut, this was a moment of pure elation. He cheered alongside the others, utterly captivated by the legendary daddy figure before him. The destiny of the realm had shifted, and Aegon was more than content to be a part of it. Notice, MC is boasting. If it is cringe, share your thoughts as well. Chapter 40. Bahamut's piercing gaze fell upon Stannis Baratheon as he stood among the prisoners, brought forward by the soldiers. Observing Stannis, Bahamut's interest peaked, and with a nudge from the soldiers, Stannis was pushed forward to face the colossal dragon. Stannis met Bahamut's eyes, his voice silenced by the gravity of the moment. Bahamut finally broke the silence, speaking with a tone of authority, your father, Steffon Baratheon, was always loyal to House Targaryen, unlike you and your brothers. Is there anything else you wish to say before your judgment? Stannis, wearing a defeated expression, found his voice, can you spare my wife and daughter, Lord? However, instead of granting his request, Bahamut commanded, bring them here, sending a shiver of fear through Stannis. Bahamut continued, showing too much kindness to my enemy is a luxury. Are you my enemy? Stannis struggled to find the right words, his resolve wavering. "I'm willing to swear my loyalty to you, my lord," he uttered, sinking to his knees without hesitation. Bahamut pressed further. "You and your brother betrayed the realm over a woman who never loved him, accused the innocent, and murdered the heir to the Iron Throne. Do you still wish to swear loyalty?" Stannis, still on his knees and looking down, responded, which is different from what Bahamut asked for. "I'm a man who knows what I am, and I remain true to myself. I will never betray my lord." Bahamut, undeterred, continued to question, "Yet you still betrayed your king." Stannis, resolute, explained, "I was loyal only to the Lord of the Stormlands, my brother, not the Iron Throne. Now I have no lord or his descendant to serve." Stannis's words surprised Bahamut, who then stated, "Then I can give you a gift as a reminder that you must serve me loyally and a punishment to ensure your new lord won't always be lenient. If you are willing." Addressing his soldiers, Bahamut ordered, "Remove his left thumb." A soldier stepped forward with a knife and severed Stannis's thumb. Stannis bore the pain without resistance, gripping his half-finger to staunch the bleeding, his gaze fixed on Bahamut. Bahamut declared, "Good. It's time for your gift." In that tense moment, soldiers brought forward Shireen and Celis Florent, the daughter and wife of Stannis Baratheon. Shireen, witnessing her father bleeding, couldn't hold back her tears and broke free from the soldier's grasp. She rushed toward her kneeling father, who was holding his severed thumb. However, Celis remained restrained by the soldiers, unable to come closer to her husband and daughter. Stannis, feeling utterly helpless, gazed at his daughter and wife, overwhelmed by his own despair. He turned his eyes to Bahamut, seeking a glimmer of hope from the Dragon Lord, though he knew he was powerless before this mighty creature who could lead a vast army even in his beastly form. Stannis's only hope was that his lord would show mercy to his family, a plea that could keep him loyal and dutiful. Then, unexpectedly, Bahamut's voice broke the silence, saying, "Bring that girl closer to me." Stannis felt a sinking feeling, fearing the worst. He made a feeble attempt to resist the soldiers who were approaching, but Bahamut reassured him, "You don't have to worry, I won't harm a child unless I have no choice." With great effort, Stannis loosened his grip on Shireen, allowing her to move forward towards Bahamut, her teary eyes reflecting both fear and fascination. Shireen, who had always held a deep love for dragons, was not prepared for this turn of events. As she drew closer to Bahamut, he instructed, "Shireen, place your hand on me." Bahamut lowered his massive head, and Shireen, with trembling hands, touched the ancient dragon. Almost immediately, Shireen began to scream in agony. Witnessing his daughter's suffering, Stannis attempted to rush forward to save her, only to be forcefully kicked aside by Old General. Then, Rhaenys approached Bahamut, gently cradling the unconscious Shireen in her arms. Rhaenys, understanding Bahamut's intentions, knew that he was removing the curse that afflicted Shireen, dreadful grayscale. She held Shireen, who was now free of the affliction, and approached Stannis to allow him to see the miraculous change. Stannis, his heart heavy with emotion, noticed Shireen's face, now free of any trace of grayscale. Even in his weakened state, after the powerful kick from the old general standing nearby, Stannis understood the true meaning of Bahamut's gift. It was no longer a surprise to him that Bahamut possessed the power to accomplish the seemingly impossible. With gratitude in his heart, Stannis kowtowed before Bahamut as a symbol of his immense appreciation and submission.